If I had said there is a man rotting in the sink, he'd have been pleased I told him. That I told him, there is a man rotting in the sink. He'd have been pleased while rotting in the sink. If I had said there isn't, he doesn't exist, he's not there, it would probably be a semi-decomposed phrase, something like, one is rotting in the sink, though actually he may be out buying the newspaper. But not so, he is rotting in the sink. Afterwards, there is a way to rot. There is also rotting so as to. There is also one after him. After is a moment. Rotting is an accumulation of moments, or afterwards that are aftermaths. Not before, for that would be beforehand. There is always a man rotting in the sink. He is always the same as afterwards. So we are at the same point, the beginning, and the beginning is before, and before is always. Obviously, a man is not a sink. A sink cannot rot, but a man can. If I had said there is a sink rotting, I'd have said there are ways to say sink and ways to say rotting. But I didn't say rotted man, or he's rotted, or rotten. I didn't even say he's gone rotten, or to rot. Nor did I say he or all or that one. No, I didn't say that man is rotting or man is. Just one. Fundamentally, because there is always a man rotting in the sink. This is a basic fact. This has a basis in fact. All in all, it assumes defactual semantics. The process of rotting implies on the way to disappearing, de-being, decomposing. No more rotting in the sewer, seconds, ring, fear, ring, craven, fear, that's all, eh? We all know. I repeat, this fact is basic. This fact is basic. Every woman has a man rotting in her sink. The impersonal becomes universal. The universal becomes unipomo. The unipomo stays silent. All men rotting make the same face. All faces rotting make the same man. All them rotting make a male face. At this point, identification is impossible. Although there is a way to identify, the way of the sink, it's always the same sink, the same, making a male face. That is the sink. There no doubt exists. There the sink exists.
Fregall. Amb l'espresa del fregall de color verd, com un prat verd. Rasco. Rasco mentre intento amb la mandíbula serrar el teu nom dins la cavitat cranial, que ja n'és plena de noms. I sobre els noms, les pedres. I sobre les pedres, els continents. I sobre els continents, les necròpolis dels astres. Quan una pluja intensa ho esborra, i em llepa els llavis perquè digui, i digui, i digui, i no calli més. Així que rasco, frego fins que em faig sang, i de la sang en neixen roques amb un cor clos al de dins, i de la boca em cau un nom que rodola fins allí on els cavalls lleven l'ombra dels ocells que no poden volar.
Scourer. I scrub with the green scourer, green as a meadow, while with my jaw I try to etch your name in the cranial cavity that is already full of names, and on the names stones, and on the stones continents, and on the continents necropolises of stars, when a heavy downpour erases it and licks my lips, urging me to speak, 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 and never be silent. And so I scrub, I rub till I bleed, and rocks spring from my blood that enclosed a heart, and a name falls from my mouth and rolls down to where horses lick the shadows of birds that cannot fly.
Ploraneres al tanatori. Ploranera 1. Jo tracto tots els morts com si fossin vius, delicadament. Els pregunto l'hora, si tot els està bé, si prefereixen un plor més lent, una llàgrima més rodona. Hi ha morts molt mirats. Ploranera 2. Li han extret imaginació i vísceres amb l'harina fosca. El cor reposa un moment sobre la taula dels versos i algú diu que és una lluna d'estiu que batega. Ploranera 3. Arriben els familiars, s'obren les portes de l'abundància. El mort fa recompte de tots els convidats, que no en falti ni un. Ploranera 2. El van buidant lentament. Ara li extrauen els somnis amb un xuclador de vent. Se'l rebenta la bossa i els somnis escampen. Un va posar-se sota el barret d'una senyora. És ja un somni adoptat. Ploranera 3. Circulen els recordatoris amb el nom dels parents. Els pallassos negres saben que els ha arribat l'hora, faran riure el mort si res no els en priva. Ploranera 1. Molts morts són com papallones de tardor. Les esquitxa la llum i es fonen vora els baladres. Ploranera 2. A tots, més d'una vegada ens tocarà morir. Jo vaig morir l'any passat, encara tinc al nas aquella furibunda olor de flors irades i voluptuoses. Ofegar un mort és cosa de pètals. Ploranera 3. En tots els morts hi veig el mateix mort. A aquell jo ploro, per sobre de tots els altres. Ploranera 1. Es prega als assistents que no retinguin més sospirs i queixes, que deixin les mandíbules caigudes. Els missatgers del gran director del dolor precipiten dins del taüt obert rius i muntanyes, falcons que criden com si volgués ploure i un riu que es desborda ple de neus i d'amnèsies. Ploranera 2. Com plora la dona que acaba d'entrar. Plora en 30 llengües diferents i 32 morts ressusciten per agombolar-li la pena. Ploranera 3. Discuteixen acaloradament els pallassos negres amb l'advocat d'ulleres de muntura que acaba d'arribar i ja té una mà sota les faldilles de la dona que plorava. Tot fa una olor dolça, untuosa i amarga de cérvol mesquer. Déu es pixa de riure. Ploranera 1. A l'altre costat del taüt obert hi ha un jardí i un riu que hi corre. L'aroma aquí és tan forta que fins els somnis deixen de respirar. Es tornen peixos brillants i s'amaguen dins el fang de les aigües. Ploranera 2. Els morts cal lligar-los als seus llits, enverinar-los amb l'aroma de flors verinoses, dàlies, malves, gessamins, sarnats, roses pretèrites. Les seves ànimes els segueixen tèrboles, n'esperen l'eternitat, com qui espera un autobús a la parada equivocada. Ploranera 3. Finalment, Déu arriba amb el capellà al salpasser i 2 coloms blancs. De mig suat, amb la túnica blanca, esbaldregada. Fa tard. L'arribada de Déu sempre omple les butxaques. Ploranera 2. Déu coneix la mort, però no pot experimentar-la. L'home l'experimenta, però no la pot conèixer. La tensió es palpa. Ploranera 3. La família pren possessió del mort. Sospesa amb una mesura, possessions, ossos, ronyons, pulmons, artèries, venes. Ho vol tot és seu. Ploranera 2. Tot és seu, però no l'ànima. Cap ànima és engendrada, cap ànima és parenta d'altra. Ploranera 3. Convidats i familiars van deixant la casa funerària. S'han fet 3 negocis i s'ha signat el naixement d'un nen en una futura parella i s'han reconciliat, encara que per poca estona, uns vells amics. Ploranera 2. Tots naixem perfectes per a la mort, malforjats per a la vida. Ploranera 1. Una dona plora efusivament i provoca una tempesta de neu. Es desprenen allaus de les regions closes. Els llavis dels morts s'omplen de flors i de gel.
Wailers in the sanatorium. I treat all the dead as if they were alive, considerately. I ask them the time, if everything's fine, if they prefer a slower wail, a more fulsome tear. The dead could be very picky. Wailer 2. They extracted his imagination and entrails with a dark, dissecting hook. For a moment, his heart rests on the table of verse, and someone says it throbs, like a summer moon. Wailer 3. Family arrive. The doors of abundance open. The dead man tallies up the guests, lest anyone is missing. Wailer 2. They empty him slowly. Now they extract his dreams using a pipe to hoover. Their bag bursts, and the dreams escape. One slips under a lady's hat. It's now an adopted dream. Wailer 3. Reminders circulate with the relatives' names. The black clowns know their time has come. They'll make the dead man laugh, if nothing stops them. Wailer 1. Many corpses are like autumn butterflies. The light splatters them, and they melt by oleanders. Wailer 2. We will all die more than once. I died last year. My nose still feels the strong scent of fierce, voluptuous blooms. Drowning a dead man is all about petals. Wailer 3. In every dead body, I see the same dead man. I weep for him over all the others. Wailer 1. Those present are begged not to repress small sighs and plaints, to let their jaws sag. Messengers from the great director of sorrow flood the open coffin with rivers and mountains. Falcons shriek as if wanting to rain, and a river overflows with snow and oblivion. Wailer 2. How the woman who just came in weeps. She weeps in 30 different languages, and 32 dead revive to soothe her sorrow. Wailer 3. The black clowns argue heatedly with a lawyer with rimmed specs who has just arrived, his hand already under the skirt of the weeping woman. Everything gives off the sweet, unctuous, bitter smell of musky deer. God pisses himself laughing. Wailer 1. There is a garden on the other side of the open coffin where a river runs. The aroma is so pungent, even dreams stop breathing. They turn into glittering fish and hide in the muddy waters. Wailer 2. The dead must be tied to their beds, poisoned with scent from poisonous blooms, dahlias, mallow, moth-eaten jasmine, faded roses. Their spirits follow them into the mists. They await eternity, like somebody waiting for a bus at the wrong stop. Wailer 3. God finally arrives with priest, hyssop, and 2 white doves. He's sweating in a white tattered tunic. He's late. God's arrival always fills pockets. Wailer 2. God knows death, but cannot experience it. Man experiences it, but cannot know it. The tension is palpable. Wailer 3. The family take possession of the dead man. Parsimoniously weigh up name, possessions, bones, kidneys, lungs, arteries, veins. They want the lot. It's all theirs. Wailer 2. It's all theirs, but not his spirit. No spirit is begat. No spirit is related to any other. Wailer 3. Guests and family are leaving the funeral establishment. 3 deals have been done and the birth of a child has been agreed for a couple to be. And some old friends have made up, though it won't last for long. Wailer 2. We're all born perfect for death, cack-handed for life. Wailer 1. A woman weeps effusively and provokes a snowstorm. Avalanches crash down from enclosed regions. The dead man's lips fill up on flowers and frost.
Bon Sant Jordi a tothom. Vinc a llegir uns quants poemes per aquesta iniciativa tan bonica. Em dic Anna Gual, soc poeta i escric en català i com us deia llegiré uns quants poemes en català que em fan molta il·lusió i seran de diferents llibres. Començarem amb un poema que es diu S'ha de fer forat. Agafo una pala i un rasclet i començo a cavar cap avall, trencant primer les rajoles, esmicolant després el ciment i la terra que el sosté. I totes les pedres que trobo les deso a les butxaques per si tot d'una visc una esllavissada i cal fer un mur i esperar que la cosa es calmi. No vull pensar on arribaré ni quan tardaré, ni si al final hi trobaré algú cavant en sentit contrari. Qui sap si xocaré sense tenir temps per prevenir la col·lisió contra el cap d'algú ple de fang i runa. La veritat, pànic de xocar contra mi, de ser jo la pregunta i la resposta. Commoció. El record d'unes ungles amb escates de llum el tinc present sovint. També porto amb mi un pantà ple d'estrelles, l'ombra d'un bosc sencer cremant, les espurnes d'un toll de lava i una desena de rostres avançant entre la boira a la llum brillant dels llamps. En la memòria d'un cec, un raig de sol s'incrusta en un vidre entelat. Aquests poemes eren d'un llibre que es titula Implosions i ara seguiré llegint altres poemes d'aquest llibre que es diu L'ésser solar. Selva interior. Crec que m'he desviat de l'asfalt. Crec que això que em fereix són branques. Sé que no he de posar-me severa, però el bosc s'està espessint i tampoc caldria fer veure que no m'espanta. A les fosques, la boira no apareix. A les fosques no ressona quan m'abraço. Palparé les arrels per sentir el camí. Si trobo nèctar i un niu amb larves, potser encara hi ha esperança. Quanta innocència s'amaga entre els arbres que em volen acollir a la fageda. Quanta tardor aplegada als genolls tous d'aquesta natura morta, d'aquest pou, d'aquest mur que diu que es trenca, que s'esquerda per les venes. No em trobaràs quan les coses prenguin el nom de la tristesa. No em trobaràs perquè estaré al revers de les paraules. Us llegiré ara un poema d'aquest llibre que també vaig publicar fa un temps, que es diu Símbol 47. Lector a la gruta. Pobre aquell que repetirà el procés de l'abandó. Pobre aquell per ser-ne l'amo. Si em vaig fullejant els llavis, em llegeixo les entranyes com si fos un profeta amagat rere la porta que m'ha de conduir a l'ànima. Vaig néixer cova. Encara no m'heu entès. I seguint en aquesta celebració literària i també poètica, un poema ara d'aquest llibre que es titula Molsa. Pa i ceba. Les formigues recullen amb pinces el crani de les roses. Us esperem a la porxada on ens balla l'ànima. Tenim un alfabet que ens entreté de la mort. I seguint en aquesta voluntat de compartir-vos poesia i poemes, aquest poema d'un llibre que vaig publicar que es diu Ameba, i aquest llibre anava sobre justament la gestació d'un ésser viu i el postpart, els primers mesos de criança, no? Que no són sempre tan idíl·lics com ens venen. El llibre està partit en dues meitats, i aquest poema que ara llegiré es diu Crom i pertany a la primera meitat del llibre. Si la solidesa no existeix, com és que l'esquelet s'aguanta? Si el cervell és tan mal parit, com és que el coll encara el subjecta? Carn, que vol dir descens, que vol dir vèncer les misèries, que vol dir entaforar-se dins les venes d'un mateix i clavar-hi la bandera. Començar el vers pel final, recomençar, avant néixer. He dit avant néixer, calia dir postmorir, calia dir pensar cap endarrere. Voldria perdre'm pel carreró on es conreen els fetus. Aquest és l'objectiu primer. Aquesta és la meva resistència. I ho deixem aquí. M'ha fet molta il·lusió participar en aquesta iniciativa tan bonica, perquè Sant Jordi al final el que ha de fer és travessar fronteres i propagar-se, perquè l'idea de combinar la naturalesa, la natura, no? I les flors amb la literatura i els llibres crec que és incomparable i segurament, doncs, com a més llocs on arribi, més llocs i més gent se la voldrà fer seva, aquesta tradició. Moltes gràcies i llarga vida a la poesia.
Hi, I'm AKaiser, AK, poet and translator. Today, I will be sharing with you my translations of poems by Catalan poet Anna Gual, which she just read to you in Catalan. I am currently translating Anna's selected works, Unnamable, for which I have received an NEA fellowship. Very grateful for that, of course. Thank you, too, to Chloe Garcia Roberts at Harvard Review's Omniglat series and Rana J. Hanshi at Contramundum Press's Hyperion for publishing some of this work. And please look for more in the June issue of Poetry Magazine. I'd also like to point out the map behind me of Door County, Wisconsin, where, thanks to Right On Door County and its founding and artistic director, Jared Santek, I am currently enjoying a translation residency. Thank you, too, to Marianne Newman and the SANT JORDI Festival NYC 2023 team for this gathering, and to, of course, Anna Gual for entrusting me with her highly lauded, visceral, earth-laden work. And now for the poems. This is from her collection, Implosions, Needing to Make a Hole. I grab a shovel and a rake and start digging down, breaking the tiles first, smashing the cement second, and the earth that holds it and all the stones I find, I shove into my pockets in case of a sudden landslide. And I have to raise a wall and wait for everything to calm down. I don't want to think about where I'm headed or how long it'll take, or if in the end I'll find someone digging in the opposite direction. Who knows if I'll crash, with no time to prevent the collision, against someone's head full of mud and rubble. Truth is, panic to crash, against myself, to be myself, the question and the answer. Commotion is also from Implosions, and it starts with an epigraph by the Argentine poet Alejandra Pizarnik. The sun shut down. The meaning of the sun shut down. The meaning of shutting down lit up. The memory of nails scaled in light is often present in my mind. Also, I carry in me a swamp full of stars, a shadow of an entire forest ablaze, the sparks from a pool of lava, and a dozen faces advancing through the fog, lit by bright lightning. In the memory of a blind person, a ray of sun embedded in a clouded glass. From Anna's collection, The Solar Being, this poem is called, in English, Inner Forest. I think I veered from the pavements. I think what hurts me are the branches. I know I shouldn't take it all too seriously, but the forest is thickening, and I don't have to pretend it doesn't scare me. In the dark, fog is invisible. In the dark, there's no resonance when I brace myself. I'll grope along the roots to feel the way. If I find nectar and a nest of larvae, there may still be hope. How much innocence hides among the trees as they welcome me to the beech forest. How much autumn gathers on soft knees of all this still life, this wall that says it's breaking, that it's cracking along the veins. You won't find me when things take on the name of sadness. You won't find me because I'll be on the other side of words. From Anna's collection, Symbol 47. As you see, she's quite prolific, and she has a new book out as well. Occultations came out late last year. This poem is called Reader in the Grotto. Poor thing who will repeat the process of abandonment. Poor thing for being the master. If I leaf through my lips, I read my guts, as if I were a hidden prophet behind the door that has to lead me to the soul. I was born a cave. You still don't get me. This poem is from Anna's collection, Moss, which in fact is part of the trilogy. Bread and onion. The ants gather with tweezers the skulls of roses. We'll be on the porch where the soul leads our dance. We have the alphabet to distract us from death. And the last poem today is from the collection Amoeba, and it's called Chrome. If solidity doesn't exist, how does a skeleton hold up? If the brain is so wicked, how does the neck still support it? Flesh, which means degradation, which means overcoming misery, which means burrow inside those veins and nail a flag there. Begin the verse at the end. Begin again, before birth. I said before birth. I should have said post-death. I should have said think backwards. I'd like to get lost in the alley where fetuses are cultivated. This is the primary objective. This is my resistance. Thank you very much. And thank you again to the SANT JORDI team for organizing this amazing event.
Hello, you readers in New York celebrating SANT JORDI.
Hello, New Yorkers.
We're glad to be here to talk about the novel Wenlings that Gemma Ruiz has published in Catalan and I've translated into English.
Let me introduce you the cover. Here you are. It will release on August, isn't it?
It's released in August, yeah.
Okay, so Peter, what would you like to know about the
Well,
novel that you know very well because you are my translator?
I first read you when I read the novel Argelagas, which is set in the countryside in Catalonia and deals with a historic period with women working in a textile factory. And I was surprised. Here was a novel that's set in a Chinese hairdresser's in Barcelona. How come you made this kind of change?
Well, always when I write a novel, I always think that it's the only one, the last one. But then your mind starts to prepare something. Then while one novel, the first one, and to the second one, I was noting everything that I catch in the street, in the metro, in while shopping, everything I was finding interesting and noting in my iPhone, in the notes in the iPhone. And then one day I realized that the quantity of the notes that came from my hairdresser or the place where I went to do my nails done, like this is tiny in green, but most times in red one, red color. So was taking the protagonism of my notes. So I thought, why not to write about the center of a novel that take place in a hairdresser, because of the feminized spaces are always marginalized from the core of the fiction. Not that happen with the masculinized spaces at such bars, for example. And for me, it was a kind of a political choice to explain our contemporary world through the eyes that comes from a hairdresser. It was that the point of the beginning of the novel.
And you use it as a narrator.
Yeah.
Someone who is has been making documentaries for television, or is making documentaries for television, and it seems as if she's almost doing a kind of ethnographic study of Chinese hairdressers in Barcelona. And then she decides that she's going to concentrate on this single one. And she gets to know the family. She really gets to know the couple that run the hairdressers, in particular, the mother.
Yeah.
I was wondering how much is the mother and the family related to the actual hairdressers that you got to know, and how much is your imagination creating the background and the history of that particular family and the way that they came from China as refugees, really.
Yeah. I knew this family from China that for me was the open door to this reality that I would like to describe. And I choose this narrator, a girl very similar to me, because I would like to explain the discovering of my own privileges, my white privileges.
Yeah.
So this unconsciousness of our privileges is what make you not aware of our racism, our social racism. So I would like to be like this narrator that is discovering its privileges and its racism, and she is discovering the way to fight it. So it was 50% people that I've known, people that I've known going to these nail salons, several nail salons, and the other half, it's a product of studying the Chinese diaspora that I studied it in New York.
In New York.
I visited a lot of times the MoCA Museum, and I feel very grateful to their knowledge and
Yes.
their library and all the books that I could study there. So the diaspora, the Chinese diaspora, the inside racism, this was a focus. The real story and the real story of the nail salons, even in Barcelona, in New York, the origins of that, and then this discovering of the privileges.
The drawback was first going to film school with blood red manicure, then asking if anyone wanted me as an assistant of an assistant of an assistant. It made you far too visible, more so then at the end of the millennium when friends couldn't care less about nails. As for those into documentaries, my forte, better not even go there. They gripped their ciggies tight and looked at me in disgust out of the corner of their eyes. Real deal documakers roll their sleeves up, get their hands dirty and hate poseur, they hinted without saying a word. And so as not to seem a naive, lonesome ninny, I had no choice but to ditch my adolescent fondness for that dramatic number 3. I had to shelve my red delirium for when I could retreat into my shell in the holidays, which was also when I could have a ball with the books that movies had forced me to set aside. All alone in plastic flip-flops under the olive tree at my grandparents', indulging in books with, you bet, bright gleaming nails. I remember the September I made up my mind. The queasy stomach when I started my first paid job at a production company, and the zero censoring of my nail polish. Not a word was said. That would happen later. And the all six spread and spread, and we come to today, when tobacco and nails have swapped places. Now almost nobody in our line of work smokes, and almost everybody is fash conscious with painted nails. Most of all, the real deal. The ones who roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty, and lots in my shade of red too.
For me, it was important to start the novel with this little bit of irony about the construction of the femininity. This is a never-ending question, never-ending solution question, because all of us at certain age, we think about all the patriarchal mandatories that we have in our bodies, the hair, the nails, the weight, the way we look. No, is very, very always problematic. If you do something, if you don't, no, it's it's always a problem. The way the women shows us at the wall. So this was for me. I have to talk about that because the core of the novel is a hairdresser, so it's a nail salon. So I can't avoid this issue for women.
And the self-consciousness of
the
self-consciousness of the narrator helps her to grasp the issues that women have faced at different generations, the women that are in the hairdressers. I really like those chapters where these women talk about the problems. Is that chapter when the older women are all talking about their first sex, when they got married, or orgasms.
Yes, this is a space, the hairdress, for the sorority, for the sisterhood too, and it was important for this novel too. This space for them, and this kind of taboo things that comes from when you have this security space between us. All of us know what this sensation to be safe. So you are safe, you can open your heart and you can explain things that you never explained before, like the first sex in your life. And even especially in this old elder woman that this was a stigma, a taboo, this issue is nowadays an issue. So for them even more.
Yeah, and at the same time, as we have this older generation of women, there is a younger generation. I'm thinking of the woman who was raped, and then the rapist then becomes the mayor of her town. The woman the other woman who is pregnant, who is being beaten by her husband.
Because if you want to explain the truth in your neighborhood, in your society, these things happen every time, every hour. So, but then you have to live with that and go ahead.
I'm now going to read another text from the novel about a young girl called Kuchuk Hanem, who you probably have never heard of, although you may have read about in relation to somebody else who is much more famous. But she is the one who really should be famous. Perhaps they believed we people of my land were so much dead stone too. We were not, but we were forced to act as if we were. My body was already granite when the man with the inky fingers appeared, the one who paid for 2 nights with me and found that enough to dare write about who I was. The man with the inky fingers stole my voice, pulled my skin off and inflated it with air made of lies. He wrote that I was a dancer, and I tell you I was a slave who had to perform for them before lying with them. He wrote that I was a machine that didn't distinguish between one man and the next, and I tell you I was a girl who'd been cut to pieces. He wrote that I revelled in lasciviousness, and I ask you, what kind of desire can be fired by the flesh of someone who denies your will? He also wrote that I wasn't a woman, but a world. And you believe that nonsense too. The man with the inky fingers was evidently one of your best men in the art of fabling. That must be true, because even today you look at the women from my land and the land where the sun rises with the lustful eyes of his fantasy. Now, you know, Gustave Flaubert knew nothing about my life or my death. I can't swear I caught the disease from him, but I can vouch that the infection came from foreigners like him. They called it the French sickness, and at 20 I was covered in sores. I didn't want to wait for my flesh to rot. One moonless night I slipped out and went in search of my parents. I went to find a well, and now I live in the enchanted waters left by the last rains wherever they fall. Only when you disturb their calm with a stone will the waters break that spell. Only when they are a mirror once more will you stop there and the waters open up, and you will see who I really am and learn my name and hear how my words sound and everything that is yet to be said. Do not be afraid to rewrite the jaded histories of the women from my land and the lands where the sun rises. It is much more frightening to leave her like that, head under water, swollen and blue, without soul or heart.
So many days I didn't write this, and it touched me again. Because for this novel was important to show us the origins of the Orientalism and fetishization of the Eastern women. And there is a major author that has part of this responsibility that it's Gustave Flaubert and all these great pieces of art.
Yes.
But they train us how to look these young women, these adolescents, with these pornographic eyes. So
Yeah.
this is the origin of all the stereotypes and prejudgment about nowadays these women.
Yes. And also, within the novel, there is another famous person who comes up in a very different way, from a very different perspective, and that is Tippi Hedren.
Yes.
I was surprised to meet Tippi Hedren in this novel.
I love this story because when I was studying the origins of the manicure culture, and especially the nail salons that now we know, because there are plenty every city in the world.
Yeah.
But where is the origin? Who has this idea of these little places, bar salons? And it's Tippi Hedren's idea. And because she was working with people, with bold people that came from Vietnam after the war, and she was thinking about something to help these women that were refugees in United States, how to help them to be independent, economically independent. And she has a manicurist, Tippi Hedren, in Hollywood, and she thought, well, if they take classes from manicure, and maybe it could be this job as a refugees in United States, with the difficulty of the not speaking properly English, being a kind of aliens in this society, and this could be a good job. And it was the seed of a very flourishing business that nowadays there are plenty in many cities in the world, even in Barcelona.
Yeah, everywhere, in fact. I'll now read a text about the woman Wenling, the center of this novel. She's telling me she had to leave her children in China with her grandmother, and I'd assume she'd talking about her mother, but she isn't. I reckon both must be really young, and I phrase it delicately when I ask her how you survive when your kids are so far away for so long. Sometimes making yourself understood is harder than climbing a mountain with a chest of drawers on your back, but we work at it, take deep breaths, and climb to the top. I know mother. I never seen mother. That's quite something else, losing her one day or never having one. I know photo. I not know. And with her hand she drew the world's saddest oval. Can you imagine not knowing what your mother's face looks like? No, Wenling, I can't. She's no longer staring at me. Her eyes are on the far ocean. I don't dare pry any further. Father, yes, he alive, she says, coming back to earth, 67. Such staccato brevity doesn't augur well, so I too keep quiet. She puts me in the picture, which means she has to mention her grandmother. One fine day, her father offloaded her with a, "You'll land on your feet." It was hard bringing up a granddaughter, but she toiled away, and grandmother acted as mother, father, and Holy Ghost. I cry a lot when she die. She swells her belly and says, "Hai Tao." It happened when she was 8 months pregnant with the boy. Grandmother always put me first and teach me everything. I cry a lot, a lot. This, I think, shows the kind of sensitive relationship between the narrator and Wenling, the hairdresser.
Yeah, because in fact, this novel is also a story of friendship, and you could have this you could be lucky and make a friend when you didn't expect it, and
Yeah.
this is what it happens in this novel. And when you are with full attention with these people, with the people that is in front of you, and such intimacy when your nails are done.
Yes.
So it's a human reaction, the empathy, the sorority, and maybe a lot of people that make their nails done at this kind of nail salons never asked for the name of the girl or the woman that is in front of them. And with this novel, maybe post reading this novel, maybe they will ask, "What's your name? Where do you come from? Are you fine here in our society?" It's my desire.
Yeah. And you explore the kind of the language issue within this.
Yes.
Because obviously the novel is written in Catalan, which is your mother tongue, and Wenling speaks in a broken Spanish. She's learning.
A very poor Spanish.
She's learning Spanish. It's a kind of poor Spanish, and she has two children, the Hytal that she mentions, and the girl, and they speak good Catalan. They're learning Catalan. They speak Spanish. So there's that whole, and of course, the two young children now can no longer talk to their grandmother because she speaks in a dialect, a Chinese dialect that they've lost touch with.
Yeah.
So that this whole issue of language in communication, in relationships, is also very central to your novel.
Yeah, because the migration is always a story of lost your relatives, lost your mother tongue, lost your roots, and this kind of griefs, a lot of griefs, and we are not aware of that. We talk about people that migrate with a very few empathy or our awareness of all these kind of lost that go with the backpack.
Yes.
And the language one is one of the most important for me because it's your identity.
Yes.
Your way to show you at the world, and without your original language, you became another person, and not the person with all your with all the things that make you strong in the society. Yes. Because you are a little bit less without your main language. So I thought it was important to explain it.
Yeah. The novel, well, this is a spoiler, but the novel finishes, it seems, on a kind of optimistic.
Yeah.
The narrator and Wenling and Wenling's Chinese friend who's visiting, they go out for
a ladies' night.
For a ladies' night.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, Wenling and her husband seem to say that they're going to have to go back to China because Catalonia will not receive them as being real Catalans ever. Perhaps their children, but they've come up against so many obstacles, like with the bank, for instance.
Yeah. There are so many obstacles. Being an immigrant people in another country, that it's very difficult. It's very hard. You have to be very brave. You have to be very determined to improve the life for your children. But at least maybe you could say, okay, stop for me. I come back because that's so hard. That's so it's not funny. Never laughing. Always struggling. So it's very hard. It's the reality. So I would like to show it as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Gemma.
Thank you very much. Sorry for my poor English.
No, it's fine. No, thank you.
And I love to be in New York someday, and maybe to go to the Mocha Museum in Chinatown to say thank you. This is the result of your help. This book, this novel. Maybe they will cross the ocean from London to New York with the novel.
I'm sure that will happen, yes.
Cross
Okay,
fingers.
yes, cross fingers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hello, my name is Sharon Dolin, and I'm here celebrating Sant Jordi with you and happily reading poems from my translations from Catalan of Gemma Gorga's poetry, and the name of the collection is Late to the House of Words. I'm going to read you some poems again by Gemma Gorga that I translated. The first one is the title poem for the collection, contains the title within it. It's called Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. We showed up late to the House of Words. Now we grope our way downstairs as painful as vertebrae and search between the wall's plastered shards for some living syllable, sister to bread and poverty, to bring to our lips, such as a name, a woman's name, the bone of a woman's name lost between the stones of these walls that once upon a time housed flesh inside, and perhaps a jewel, a little box, a mirror you could ask, so many things. I'm going to read you a bunch of short poems. This is called So Then She. With flour and water she worked his body. With flour and saliva she conceived, leaned, learned that with flour and both hands you reach the secret pliability of matter. With flour and lips she worked the man down to the unbearable elasticity of tenderness. Then slowly she tasted his body, the bread that was his body, bread that fit as well in her hands as does light on earth. It's kind of an alternative creation story for you. The rest of the poems, they're short, and a lot of them are about words and language. This one is called Kaleidoscope. I turn the capricious kaleidoscope of the dictionary between my fingers. Sometimes a poem appears, radial and symmetrical, carrying my frame of mind. Sometimes I wonder if it won't be the other way around, if it won't be my frame of mind to adapt symmetrically to the words received, deceived, retrieved, to say. Who was she? She had a crucifix at the head of her bed, and she wasn't a believer. A busted suitcase in a corner of her bedroom, and she crossed no border. An apron pocket full of candies, and she had no sweet tooth. A lavender lipstick matching the shade of her skin, and 2 cashmere blouses. But she never left the slow, inclined orbit of mourning. All these things she had. Who was she? If only I knew how to look for her in whatever she didn't have. That's a poem I believe is about one of the poet's grandmothers who passed away. This is from the final collection that I excerpt in this selected poems. And this poem is called Hospitality of the Blank Page. Since there are too many of us creatures for so little love, I put the word in the lock and beckon angels and flies, gods and bumblebees, nettles and petals to come inside with me and occupy democratically this new home of empty lungs. Just 2 more, I believe. Venomous species. Words are this collection of tiny seeds stored under the tongue. At any moment, the possibility exists of spitting one out and killing someone. Likewise, of swallowing one and dying. And this is the final poem in this selected poems, and it's called Decreation. Learn from crabs the peaceful art of going backwards. Learn to unlearn, go shoeless, digress, surprise yourself yet again. Look at an apple until you liberate it from the fine dust of allegory. Know nothing about what you should know. Forget artificial rhetoric and the boring mechanics of the atom. Look without saying, I am looking. Love without saying, I am loving. Leave verses unfinished. Leave verses. Leave. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to share with you some of Gemma Gorga's poetry.
Hello, everybody. Happy SANT JORDI 2023. I hope it's going to be a good one for you and that you'll give a lot of books and get a lot of books and give some roses and get some roses and generally celebrate the world of Catalan literature. I'd like to read to you from a writer called Anna Dodas y Noguer. I have translated a book of poetry by her, as it happens, her complete poetry called The Volcano, Volcano. Dodas also wrote short fiction, short narratives, I would call it. They're not very conventional short stories, but they are, as one might imagine, poetic. She thought of herself really at the beginning as a writer of narratives. She wrote them first before she took up poetry. The poetry came out first, although she did publish a couple of these stories. After her death in 1986, her poetry was brought together in a collected poetry called The Volcano, Volcano. And then years later, and very recently, actually, in 2018, all of her short narratives were brought together into a collection called Cap Vésperas de Foc i de Grana, which I translate as Twilights of Fire and Crimson. These are unique stories. I don't know of another voice like the voice of Anna Dodas when it comes to either poetry, actually, or these short narratives. I have translated the title story, and I'd like to read it to you. It is 7 pages long, not very long, but relax, get your cup of tea, hit the pause button when you need to. And here we go. Twilights of Fire and Crimson by Anna Dodas y Noguer. When I was little, I loved apples. My mother would always crush one with a fork and give it to me with honey, and that was my afternoon snack. If she didn't give me an apple, I didn't have a snack. I also loved the way they looked. She would take them from the pantry and line them up in front of me, and I would gaze at them. I liked only the red ones. For me, apples were red and no other color. I polished them and polished them over and over until they were as smooth and shiny as glass. Then I put them in front of the fire and gazed at them. I would see the flames reflected on the apples like a red mirror. They captured strange and exotic colors, and I stalled myself in front of the fire, and the empty dining room was filled with the sound of the fire. Crackle, crackle, the branches falling apart, and the smell of the fire and the apples. The apples, so round and red and juicy, reflected the world of the fire and seemed to be a delicious round mirror with a little tail to hold it by and see the flames reflected from above. I arranged them on the mantel, and they gleamed the color of blood, staring at me intently. I sat in front of the fire and watched, and while I watched, I thought of nothing, only looked. I looked at the fire, round and warm and crimson, which gave off a sweet smell that enveloped me little by little and clung delicately to my clothes and hair. I sat with my feet dangling above the floor and barely breathed so as not to make a sound and break the monotonous silence of the fire and the apples. So quiet, the apples, so red. Over the blood, they had a thin layer of ice or of syrup that I was told was wax. Motionless, they endured my fixed stare. My gaze didn't disturb them in the least, and they remained completely self-contained. Thinking, I don't know what, so inscrutable, perhaps about the fire, that they continued to reflect steadily. When they gleamed, their shadow created a mystery that made my heart shrink from it, even as I was drawn to it. This was my daily ritual, and I looked forward to it. Impatient, I waited for the sun to pass across the sky, full of eager excitement, went to find apples and polished them with my skirt, and after that was when everything was ready, and I attained ecstasy and was drawn into the magic that the apples spread throughout the house and that entered into the very pores of my skin. I was spellbound by the silent evening. The spell was broken when my father suddenly entered and clumsily turned on the lights and opened the blinds, making a lot of noise and shouting, and we all ate with a great hubbub of stamping and voices and clinking of plates and cutlery and glasses that my mother brought from the kitchen. I hated my father when he entered like that, opening the door with such a loud crash. My mother said it wasn't good for me to spend so much time alone, looking at apples and honey. I loved honey too. I scooped it from a big jar with a spoon and dripped a thin thread onto the crushed apple. I made zigzags, twisting and turning and making designs and strange hieroglyphics. First, I dripped a single stripe. It was hard to decide where to go next. The honey followed the curve of the spoon, creeping toward the edge until at last it began to drip. The stream became thinner and created triangles and stars until it pooled on the crushed apple. My fingers became sticky, then my lips from the gluey sweetness. The color was rain and fire and old wood waxy with the blood apple wax. Now I know why I loved it so much. It was because I already knew that he would tell me about the melting light that I saw from the dining room on those twilights of fire and crimson. When it dies, light is concentrated in flame and apples, and so they have these clear reflections that illuminate the whole room until it grows darker and deader. The sun is ashamed every day to ruin everything with its unbearable gaze that destroys all the magic of the world and exposes it and humiliates it in front of everyone. It's ashamed and it goes away and lets all the rays become sweet and turn into fire or honey or apple, and it returns to its place every day, and every color becomes more intimate and sweet, and I feel them on my skin when they creep timidly across the dark. All the fathers in the world would have discovered light bulbs, and now I can no longer find the sweetness of apples and fire and honey and fog. He never spoke to me about fog, and that's why the fog is mine. He spoke to me about everything, but about fog, no. And that is because the fog is really mine and no one else's. No one, not even he, knows what fog is. And no one has found the light. Only me. It's said that fog is cold and wet, thick or patchy, treacherous or not. No one has ever said that it's sweet. I do. It's the only protection that we have against the light of the sun. The fog is in love with the sun, and so its rays come to us diffused, scattered, slanted, and they come to us evenly, tinting little by little and very sweetly and top to bottom the world that the fog covers. The colors fade away and come to us unhurried and tranquil, without end, without the slightest urgency. The fog also filters the shouts and immerses everything it touches in the quietest silence and gives us the gift of peace, and we love things that are quiet. Moist, everything has a sweeter color. On foggy days, the fire was lit all day. And all day, the evening crept in, quiet and unobtrusive, and then kept still. All day poems were quieter and more absorbed than ever. The poet didn't know that he had composed a poem for me. In writing it, perhaps he thought about a little blonde girl who would never read it, and I, on the other hand, loved only apples from when I was little, because the poet had composed a poem that he would read to me one day and would recite it to me in a soothing voice that made my ear moist. It was for me that one day the poet wrote, "Without longing, the light fades away from us, which was the color of honey and is now the color of the scent of an apple." When he recited it to me for the first time, I didn't understand it, but without knowing why, I loved it. I loved the sound, the music, above all that color of the scent of an apple, which I understood least of all. And I didn't understand it because I hadn't yet realized that I loved to look at apples and honey and go into the pantry and fill myself with the scent of wood and apples, sometimes shriveled, that filled the air. I loved it. But I hadn't yet realized that I would love it. I saw it as if it were pulled out from within, as if following a voice from within that swept me off my feet without my knowing it to the pantry. And there I looked and breathed and came out calmer with 3 apples that I carried to the dining room. And I did it because I had to. I had to be ready for what he would tell me one day, for what he, the poet, would write one day for me, and also without knowing it, because just as I watched the apples above me, looking up from the floor to the mantel without knowing why, without any idea why I did it, he would write a poem whose only purpose was for him to read it to me one day. And then he would repeat it 1,000 days, and I would hear it 1,000 days, and he would teach it to me 1,000 nights. He told me how slow the world, how slow the world, how slow the pain across the hours that hurry by. And I felt a lump in my throat, and it was only a knot of gentle tears. How slow the world, and I saw the fog and how slow everything is when the fog comes to rest, soft, heavy with diffused colors. And I saw the fog, slow, slow to rise and fluctuating, now yes, now no, now a membrane, now a cotton cushion that stretched across everything. And then night came, also gentle, and not as sudden as summer, when you see people cry when the sun goes down. The world was slow and the pain, and I didn't realize how I was seeing the slow moving fog, but I did see it, and I loved it. And the poet wrote, how slow the pain across the hours that hurry by, without knowing why he said it, without meaning it, nor his blonde little girl. Only he and I felt that a new peace had entered us, and that we were given an I don't know what, with a sweet aftertaste, privilege. How slow the red leaves of the voices, how uncertain they come to cover us. And I sensed the autumn oak leaves, moistened by the fog, longing for tranquil peace. I sensed in them the color of the skin of an apple, the color of a lick of honey. I felt them as they dropped onto my body when he said it, my lips like wet embers of fog droplets coming to rest and slowly moving around my neck, under my ear, and I found the soft breath clinging to me like the fog on a shining apple. And he watched me with his eyes of honey, now sweet from its color, now playfully making stars and brilliant designs and flashes of fire, which laughed at me and made me laugh, while the tears in my throat made a cotton cushion of fog. And the leaves of his kisses hung in the recesses of my body, and I felt them, first as a burning fire, then as apples, then as honey, and then as fire, then as honey and fog and mirror, apple and color and sun and scent and fire. And they were oak leaves, autumn red, foggy, moist. They could only be autumn leaves, the ones that paint the forests and valleys scarlet and crimson and honey, the ones that invite the fog to rest and sleep there, until summer, the leaves that summer has tortured horribly and then forgotten. In summer, he wasn't there. He came only in autumn and went away in autumn. And in summer, there were no leaves or kisses, and everything is discernible in ways disturbing and dizzying and desperate. He is the fire, and he is the apple, and he is the scent of my father and my mother, and the fireplace and the fire. He is the color of everything and of honey, and he is the autumn and oak and leaves that fall and wither away, making love to the fog so sweetly. They come together so sweetly and still have never separated, and they kiss, and it smells like fire, and it smells like his scent, which is apples, and I see the reflections of his body, the color of honey, and I see it reflect the flames of the fire. He is apples, and his scent penetrates me, not only my hair and my clothes, but penetrates me inside, and the fog and the long, soft evenings are the fire that flickers on his shoulders, which are my horizon. And beyond them, there's fog and blurred, muddled colors. And the fire makes a great crash within me. And he cries out to me to come to the edge of the world. And the sound of his cry, which has come from my mouth, shakes the fireplace and makes the apples fall and the jar of honey. And everything crumbles. And he is ashes and is no longer apple or honey, just ashes and not apple or honey. Afterward, the fog approaches slowly. It comes across his shoulders and covers us like a bath of sweetness. Tender leaves fall upon us and soft, moist apple peels and snails of honey. He says to me, the poet says to me, that my skin, my honey skin, is half moon and half sun, and he has forgotten about the fog that still covers us. I know that he left because of the poet, who didn't know what he was doing when he wrote my poem. The poet is dead, but his influence is preserved in his poem. And the poem bewitched me, and it took him away. I know that there are no more apples or honey, and a strong wind has blown the fog away to fields and forests, blown it right across the mountains, done it because he recited to me the poem of the poet who didn't know what he was doing. It's since then, since I came to understand that it was the words, the written poem, that drove away the colors of the shadow, that I hate all the poems of the world. I understood it all, and I understood the apples and the spell of the apples and honey and fog, and now I know it. Now I know it's this poem that he read to me one day, and since he repeated it to me, and I understand it, that's what did it all. And I know it while they continue to write poems with no meaning in books that weigh tons. He will be far, far away, chasing the fog across the plains and forests and fields, and the wind carried it beyond the rivers and hills and crosses towns and empty lands, and now it's far, far away. It's gotten so cold since the fog went away, because it's like you're naked, and the fog has also carried away the golden and crimson leaves that covered me, and I'm cold. And the fire keeps me company, sweet, silent company that without the fog is more colorful. The fire burns night and day, and I like looking at the flames. Now there are no more apples to reflect the flames, and I contemplate the fire as quietly as before. A flame now crimson, now yellow, now blue. From a page leaps a long, long flame that lasts an instant, and an instant later burns out. The flames born under the pages are longer lasting and bluer. The pages are small and flat, and when they start to burn out, I throw on another one. And from the printed words, a blue spark leaps underneath in the middle. A high flame begins to emerge, and in a moment and no more, they are consumed. And another, and another, and another, until the mouth of the fireplace is full of them, and I contemplate the paper twisting fitfully And while the poems die, it seems to be that my work is done. And although the fog hasn't come back, the wind no longer blows so violently. Twilights of Fire and of Crimson by Anna Dodas Noguer. Have a wonderful Dia Sant Jordi. I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope to see you again here next year for Sant Jordi. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Izidora Angel. I'm a writer and translator from Bulgarian, and I want to read to you something that was recently published in Firmament, and it's a short story by the writer Yordanka Beleva called Family Portrait of the Black Earth. After the surgeons removed my grandmother's breast, she began to cup her hands over the bare spot, the way you'd hide a physical discomfort. Baba's cupped hand, which I'd known both as a den of endearment and as a unit of time, was now also the dome of a church, a demolished church. We stood before the ruins and made out the details in the frescoes, the doctor's late diagnosis, our belated prayers. The village woman came by to visit and check on her, to see how she was feeling. Pain and suffering are strange tourist attractions. In some places around the world, large-scale tragedies have their price of admission. Houses where for years someone got held and tortured, schools where mass shootings took place, stretches of road along train wreckages. Baba's wound was free and open to the public. Sometimes she'd tell her visiting girlfriends that the only thing that hurt was her missing breast, but none of them could wrap their heads around how a piece of flesh long severed from the body could hurt. A few times Baba sent my grandfather over to the hospital to retrieve her breast so they could bury it in the garden. It was a good garden. It had yielded good harvests for years. But this wasn't an organ to be planted. The only thing it was good for was a lab culture. Diallo pretended he'd gone to see the doctors as my grandmother had asked him. Once he came back and lied that they wouldn't release the breast without special paperwork. Other times he claimed they'd missed some sort of deadline. But he could only beat around the bush for so long, and one day he came home with something from the butcher. He unwrapped it and pounded this delicacy methodically, therapeutically, until he became rawer than the raw meat. But the therapy hadn't worked. For someone on the outside looking in, Diallo must have looked like a diligent farmer prepping his winter provisions. Curing sausage, for instance, was also best done over the smoke of a smoldering fire. Diallo kept the meat away from the cats and from Baba until it shriveled enough to resemble the corpse of a breast. Baba and Diallo dug a shallow hole close to the grave of Karaman the dog. Afterward, they interred the breast corpse and covered the hole. They did not stand on ceremony. For my grandmother, it was important that she be reunited with all her body parts. She believed she could not leave the earthly realm had a part of her body been mislaid. For my grandfather, it was important to fulfill her final wish to be whole. She outlived her breast by 8 years. We covered a lot of ground during that time. We attempted to act as though nothing had happened. It's what you might call a conversational camouflage. Even so, the disguise dematerialized every time. A sudden question on whether I recalled the name of that one song about the severed head of the partisan fighter Beleva. What if Diallo had brought her another woman's breast by mistake, and that woman was now desperately searching for it somewhere? For the millionth time, to look closely at her, see how on the left side her body was that of a young girl, and on the right, that of a decrepit old woman. Our conversations took on that same asymmetry. To the left, an echo, to the right, a silence. She never visited the breast burial site, and like all neglected graves, this one quickly weeded over. Once, Baba told me how she diligently tended to her garden her entire life. She weeded from dawn till dusk because weeds were like cancer. They swiftly stifled the good plants and suffocated them. She ought to have tended to her health as she tended to her garden, she said. Be a good gardener, she told me.
I wonder sometimes whether keeping silent on what we'd really buried in the garden was the right thing to do. I saw something on the news once about two cousins who tried to rig the lottery by leaving their number pegs off the original ticket and waiting to write in the winning numbers on their carbon copy, only after they'd seen the results called on TV. They'd forgotten that the winning ticket could only be authenticated by matching all the tear-offs to the original. The other was a good criminal, I thought. He had switched out Baba's torn-off piece so well, she felt like a winner even in her biggest loss. But that's not to say this is a hopeful story. I'm not fond of hopeful platitudes, especially ones about cups that are half full. Maybe it's because I've seen what an empty brasserie looks like. At home, empty bras are archaeological finds from a long ago dried up Milky Way. Elsewhere, they are testimonials to the soft landing of motherhood. Flags signaling the capitulation of childhood. All empty brasseries are unhappy. Something is left, somebody has followed. We've yet to invent replacement padding to even out the heart's losses and keep them artificially half full. A strange plant is shooting up from the ground near where we buried the rotted meat. If I like it, I'll call it Baba's Lullaby. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Marianne Newman, and I am the translator of Final Judgements by Joan Fuster, published by Fum d'Estampa Press in 2022, with the support of the Academia Valenciana de la Llengua, the Valencian Academy of Language. In his prologue to Final Judgements by Joan Fuster, Adam Gopnik says the following: "Having never heard of the Valencian aphorist Joan Fuster before I read the book you hold, his work has had the force on me of that kind. Like points of light in the night sky, he glitters rather than connects. We emerge from reading him with a handful of stars in our hands." And he continues, "His aphorisms can be composed into constellations by our own efforts, made into a coherent ideology, but they shine brightest on their own. As always with aphorisms, the only thing to do is quote, display them." And that's what we're going to do now. But first, some words about Joan Fuster. He was born in 1922 and died in 1997 in Sueca, Valencia. Hence, in his formative years, he experienced Republican government and the Spanish Civil War. As a young adult, the university and Phalangism, a movement you can either call authoritarian conservative or directly fascist. But his devotion to his language, Catalan or Valencian, same language, different idiolects, and his culture soon led him to redder pastures. Fuster charmingly attributes his attraction to aphorisms to the block calendar of the Messenger of the Sacred Heart of Jesus on the wall in his kitchen when he was a child. Starved for reading material, he says, "I was in the habit of reading the brief lesson of morality or dogma parceled out on each page between the saints' days and the phases of the moon and the hour of the sunrise by the priests of the Company of Jesus. The more I think about it, the clearer it seems to me that this is the distant and ludicrous source of my present-day delight in the aphorism." Perhaps it was that Jesuitic humanism that led him to a different brand of humanism. At the core of Joan Fuster's thinking is the principle of Protagoras, that man is the measure of all things. But Fuster takes it one logical step further to say, Joan Fuster is the measure of all things. That radical step allows him to observe the world balefully, skeptically, joyfully by turns, though mostly skeptically, on his own terms, and to invite everyone else to do the same. You, he, she, they, I, am, and are the measure of all things. Perhaps this is why he saw no need to leave his home in Sueca, Valencia, and why others beat a path to his door. Perhaps they went to see an oracle, but Joan Fuster received them in his dressing gown, with a glass of whiskey in his hand, and hours of conversation in his throat. So, let us pretend we are visiting Joan Fuster in his house in Sueca, and hear a few of the pearls he might have dispensed. You all know the famed Greek aphorism, Joan Fuster is the measure of all things. And yet, I endorse methodical mistrust. Paul Valéry said, almost apologetically, "I do not say that I am right. I say this is the way I am." But maybe he should simply have said, maybe we should all simply say, I am right because this is the way I am. Always defend your right to change your mind. It is the first thing your enemies will deny you. And then a poignant one. We also tire of despair. If common sense, what we are given to calling common sense, were truly common, we would go insane. In essence, a euphemism is already a lie. Many wounds of love are nothing more than wounds to our self-esteem. You are always stupid with regard to someone. For something to move us, it has to be a little bit corny. The next aphorism may well be an underlying principle of fake news. Formulate an error as an axiom, and you will end up perceiving it as a truth. And this one, a principle of environmentalism. Since man is man, he has done nothing more than correct creation, amending the work of God, everything that God made, and that, according to Genesis, he saw as good. And more on God. I imagine there must be some difference or another between being an atheist regard to Jehovah and being an atheist regard to any other divinity, or all of Olympus. Fuster takes Nietzsche down with one stroke of irony. Human, all too human. Nothing is too human. Now for a series of brutal political observations. In the next one, as an American, I feel seen. The most repulsive aspect of dominating peoples may be their imposing on the dominated people the spectacle of their insoluble mediocrity. The case of Rome is not unique. Needless to say, that gentleman who cries out and protests aghast against demagoguery does not belong to the demos. Violence engenders violence, but let us not forget, tolerance also engenders violence, and despair engenders violence, and above all, truth engenders violence. Totalitarian state, isn't that a tautology? And now, a little bit on the arts and intrinsically on the senses. On the body. 5 bodily senses? We demand more. On inebriation. As for me, alcohol makes me more understanding. In the eye of the consumer, there is no particularly essential difference between philosophy and cognac or morphine. A well-played violin, a barbiturate, a dose of alcohol. On art, to some extent, every painting is a self-portrait. History of painting. Non saturatur oculus visu, Ecclesiastes 1:8. The eye is not satisfied with what it sees. Preferences. Picasso or reality? Miro or joy? Klee or silence? Chagall or truth? Joan Miró has a touch of the Holy Spirit, or if the Holy Spirit painted, he would paint like Joan Miró. It may be, though, in his aphorisms on music, where Joan Fuster reveals his quintessential sensuality, his humanism as a bodying forth. Don't kid yourselves, friends who attend concerts. Music, all music, from Palestrina or Bach to Armstrong or Stravinsky, is meant to be danced or sung. The music of Vivaldi is pure conversation. I think the poetry our times call for ought to be informed by rage or sarcasm, or just by rage, because in the long run, sarcasm is just rage attenuated by cunning. I slipped one on literature in there. This brings us, any premeditated sound can be considered music. And I will end with my favorite Fuster aphorism. Try it yourself. The Allegro in Vivaldi's Concerto Numero 1, Opus 12 for violin and orchestra can be danced as a foxtrot. There is much, much more. His observations on art are to die for. Read Final Judgements and laugh till you cry. Thank you, Fum da Stampa Press, for bringing him to the English-speaking audience. And thank you for listening.
Hi, everyone. This is an excerpt from Commander of the River, a book that was just published earlier this month. Ubah Cristina Ali Farah, the writer, is here with me and will be reading in Italian first, and I'll follow with a slightly longer section in English. What's important to know is that we're in Rome and the main character is Yabar, a teenager who has just met some other Italians with, as he says, hands that are black like mine.
Thank you, Hope. Era quasi mezzanotte quando ho accompagnato Liven a telefonare e anche se non faceva per niente caldo, sudavamo tutti e due tantissimo. Io sudavo perché mi sembrava di non ricordare più una parola di somalo, lui perché avrebbe parlato con sua madre dopo 20 anni. Il call center era un negozietto angusto con dentro tante cabine a vetri. C'erano scritte in varie lingue e oltre le pareti trasparenti si vedevano le persone parlare. Ognuno muoveva la bocca in modo diverso, ma non si sentivano le voci. Sembravano tanti pesci dentro un acquario. Appena entrati, il gestore, un uomo con la barba bianca, ci ha chiesto «Dove volete chiamare?» E noi gli abbiamo spiegato la situazione per farci dare un telefono doppio, dato che io e Liven dovevamo sia parlare che sentire. Dopo qualche minuto ci fa entrare in una cabina con 2 cornette. Lo spazio è risicato e fa un caldo infernale. Siamo sudati, l'aria è bollente, il numero telefonico infinito, il prefisso infinito e il tempo che ci mettono a rispondere infinito. Mi sembra di stare dentro in una grotta umida e penso che anche il telefono dall'altra parte sia in un posto del genere, una caverna bollente, come la nostra, con dentro la madre di Liven che aspetta da 20 anni. Il telefono squilla, attendo la voce e Liven mi fissa perché ha paura del mio silenzio. Mi dice coraggio e dall'altra parte sento «Hello, Yawai, pronto, chi è?» Parlano in somalo e capisco tutto. Ma finora ho solo trasformato il somalo in italiano, non so trasformare l'italiano in somalo io. Dall'altro capo del telefono dicono «Hello» e Liven mi ripete «Coraggio» e io vedo le parole in fila dentro la testa, le sento e le vedo tutte, scalciano e prendono forma come noci e io spingo con la fronte e con gli occhi per farle passare. Le parole sono dure, mi tagliano la testa, come quando fa caldo e bevi qualcosa di gelido. Sento una fitta tra gli occhi, riprendo fiato. Ma anche così il dolore non smette. Allora ricomincio a spingere con forza ed ecco che sento le parole venirmi alla gola e tocco la loro forma, la lingua. Spingo l'aria fuori e le parole fuoriescono intere dalla mia bocca. Vedo Liven sorridermi e dire «Mamma, sono io», lo dice balbettando e io ripeto balbettando le sue stesse parole «Hoyo, wa aniga» e le parole «mamma», «sono» e «io» suonano uguali nella nuova lingua, forse solo un po' più secche. Liven è frenetico e vuole parlare di troppe cose, di quanto l'ha cercata, di quanto gli è mancata, di quanto l'ha pensata, ma riesce a dire solo parole semplici e la madre ripete le stesse cose e io sono la madre e il figlio allo stesso tempo. Siamo nella grotta e l'aria è bollente. Io e Liven siamo tutti sudati e teniamo ciascuno una cornetta legata a un filo. La voce della madre arriva a tutti e due e le nostre voci le arrivano insieme. Sento le parole tutte intere nella bocca. Era tanto tempo che non le sentivo e quelle parole sono le parole del figlio e sono anche le mie. Io e Liven diciamo insieme Hoyo, mamma, e Waniga sono io.
Thank you, Ubah.
Thank you.
Liban, moved by the story he just heard, began telling me his own. He also, at first, lived in Somalia with both his parents. He was 10 when the war broke out, and his parents decided to seek refuge in Italy. Unfortunately, they were not able to obtain a visa for his mother, so he and his father left without her, in the hope of sending her documents and a ticket at a later date. Months passed. His father was buried in bureaucratic hassles. There was never enough money, and at a certain point, he decided to put Liban in boarding school, promising he'd be back for him soon. But things went differently than planned. After some time, he forgot about both his wife and his son, who he never went back to find. As he grew up, Liban, in turn, forgot everything he knew, even how to pronounce his own name, because there was no longer anyone to correct him. He learned Italian, and the new words canceled out the old. His mother's voice, though, he'd never forgotten. My father, too, for all I knew, had forgotten about me and my mother, but at least the two of us were still together. When he was 18, Liban had also become part of the Flaminio crew, and having finished high school, he left the boarding school and set about searching for his mom. He went to the Somali consulate to ask for information, but no one listened to him. Liban knew the names of his mother and the village where she lived, but they explained to him that the name of the person was not needed, not even that of the place in which they lived. If he wanted to find his mother, he had to know the name of the clan she belonged to. Liban didn't remember it, or maybe he'd never known it. 20 years had passed since the last time he'd seen his mother when, out of the blue, his father showed up. It couldn't be a coincidence. Liban insisted so much that the man finally got him his mother's number. Liban was so excited he ran to call her straight away. But his mom didn't speak his new language, and Liban no longer understood the old. At one point, someone tore the phone from her hand, an uncle, a relative, and in the confusion, Liban only recognized one message that they kept repeating to him in Italian. Money, money, to your mother send money. As if after so many years, the only thing she wanted from her son was money. But he himself didn't even have enough to live on. He hung up, upset, but still remembered the phone number. When the story was over, we were so shaken up that no one said anything for a few minutes, until Georgis, jumping up from the moped, had an idea. Listen, little brother, I really don't think we met by chance. I mean, your friends ditched you, you stayed outside, and there just has to be a reason that we're here together tonight, talking. The story had moved me so much that I no longer felt like provoking. Then again, I couldn't repress a vision. Zia Rosa's face attached to Georgis's body. How come certain people think that ordinary incidents hold some deeper meaning? His idea was that we could all go together to a nearby call center and ring Liban's mother. I tried to explain to him that I'd only pronounced the name correctly and didn't feel up to speaking in Somali on the telephone. The two of them were soon in league. Georgis was the pushier one. You said you have to go to London, no? This way you'll start practicing. What language do you think you'll be speaking there? Come on, it doesn't cost you anything. But it's late. At this hour, they'll all be asleep. It's about 2 a.m. in Somalia. Even better, this way we can be sure they're home. They were so insistent that, in the end, I had to give in. All right, I'll try. It was almost midnight when I went with Liban to call, and even though it was far from hot out, we were both sweating heavily. I was sweating because I felt like I no longer remembered a word of Somali. He because he'd be speaking to his mother for the first time in 20 years. The call center was a cramped little store with many glass booths inside. There were signs in various languages, and through the transparent walls you could see people talking. Each of them moved their mouths in a different way. but you couldn't hear their voices. They were like fish packed inside an aquarium. As soon as we walked in, the manager, a man with a white beard, asked us, "Where do you want to call?" And we explained the situation to him so that he'd give us a phone with 2 receivers, since Liban and I needed to both talk and listen. After a few minutes, he lets us into a booth with 2 handsets. The space is very narrow and it's hot as hell. We're sweaty, the air is boiling, the phone number endless, the calling code endless, and the time it takes him to pick up endless. I feel like I'm in a damp cave, and I picture the telephone at the other end, also in a place like this. A boiling hot cavern like ours with Liban's mother who's been waiting inside for 20 years. The phone rings. I wait for a voice, and Liban stares at me because he's afraid of my silence. He tells me, "You got this." And from the other end, I hear, "Hello, Yahweh?" Hello, who is it? They're speaking in Somali, and I understand everything. But until now, I've only ever transformed Somali into Italian. I don't know how to transform Italian into Somali. From the other end of the line, they repeat, "Hello?" And Liban says, "You got this," again, and I see the words line up in my head. I feel and see all of them. They kick and take shape like whole walnuts. I push with my forehead and my eyes to get them out. The words are hard. They cut through my head like when it's hot out and you drink something icy cold. I feel a stabbing pain between my eyes and catch my breath. But the pain still doesn't stop, so I start pushing again, pushing hard, and now I feel the words come to my throat, and I touch their shape with my tongue. I push air out, and the words spill out whole from my mouth. I see Liban smiling at me and saying, "Mama, it's me," his voice cracking, and I repeat, voice cracking, the same words, "Pollo, wa aniga," and the words "mama," "it," and "me" sound the same in the new language, maybe just a bit drier. Liban is frantic. He wants to talk about too many things at once, about how much he searched for her, how much he's missed her, how much he's thought of her, but he's only able to say simple words, and his mother says the same things, and I'm the mother and the son at the same time. We're in the cave and the air is boiling. Liban and I are both all sweaty, and we're each holding a handset attached to one cord. The voice of his mother reaches both of us, and our voices reach her together. I feel the words whole in my mouth. It had been a long time since I'd felt them, and these words are the words of the son, and they're also mine. Liban and I together say, "Pollo, mama, and wa amiga," it's me. Thank you.
I'm Tess Lewis, and I will be reading from the German-French writer Anne Weber's novel and verse, Epic Annette. This novel asks what it means to be a hero in the 20th century. In answer, Anne Weber turns to the genre of the epic poem to tell the extraordinary true story of Annette Beaumanoir, named one of the righteous among nations, who died in March of last year. Beaumanoir's gripping story, including her exile from France and separation from her children, embodies the tragic conflict between political activism and familial obligation. This novel, about courage, resilience, and the struggle for freedom, is also a nuanced look at the ethics of heroism. Guided by a passion for justice and a fervent belief in self-determination, Annette Beaumanoir joined the French resistance while studying medicine in Rennes and then moved to Paris at the age of 19. After the war, she supported the Algerian Liberation Front in France, resulting in her imprisonment in 1959 while pregnant with a third child. After making a dramatic escape, she then served in the Ministry of Health under Algeria's first president, Ben Bella, until his overthrow in 1965. Exiled from her homeland, having been found guilty in absentia and sentenced to 10 years in prison, she moved to Switzerland and worked in a clinic there until an amnesty finally allowed her to return to France. Anne Weber wrote the novel in French and in German, 2 separate versions, and I used both to triangulate into a free verse English version. This excerpt I'll read is from Annette's time in the resistance. She was posted in Lyon. Annette is alone in Lyon. Roland is far. Before, she'd received news of her parents now and then, through a third party. Not anymore. As the resistance and prudence dictate, she has finally cut all ties to her past and to the future. Isolation is the watchword. She must be as silent as the tiny fish she is in the great machinery of the movement, without acquaintances or friends. If anyone tries to start up a conversation or asks a question, she puts them off with a polite, evasive answer and moves on with a preoccupied air. She knows her few contacts by sight and by their false names. Exchanging anything other than official information is forbidden. She slips ever further out of the society for which she has given up her studies, her family and friends, her lover, and would even give up her life, although she acts as if she were just like everyone else. That is, she gets dressed every morning and leaves the house, or rather houses, in which she lives now under this name, now under that, and comes home as if from work. Although she acts as if she had a social life, she is alone, and as lonely at 20 as if she were on the moon. Like Odysseus on his long journey, seeing his companions perish one after the other, Annette is gradually cut off from her origins and her past. Not one person she meets in Lyon knows her real name or her history. She lives in her own shadow, and like Odysseus, if asked for her name, she could truly say, "I am nobody." As if on autopilot, Annette walks the streets of Lyon, without knowing why or to what end. All the instructions given to the pawns on the Resistance's giant chessboard are worded so that these small fish have no idea why they are doing this or that. She must surrender her free will, at least until she herself has a few will-less pawns to direct. What is it that drives her? Why has she given up her life, the only one she has, before it has begun? Does she even know? Do we ever really understand why we do what we do? Reasons to explain her actions are easy to find. Who would want to be terrorized by the Germans, especially citizens of another land? Wanting to fight against oppression and against foreign rule, wanting to fight for justice, reasons enough to join the struggle. Enough indeed, and yet there might be others. As a fighter with the underground, she may well have made peace with herself and what she wants from life. If it's true, as some believe, that we are always playing a role for others and ourselves, then she is playing one that seems tailored for her and can therefore hardly be considered a role at all, but rather is her true self. There is another factor to consider: the thrill of risk, the adventure, the feeling of leaving a gray and monotonous existence behind, along with familiar habits and customs. In the hall of mirrors that is her new life, everything is reversed. What once was bad, falsehood, let's say, or spying, theft, is now good, simply because the end justifies the means. Furthermore, the end tends to swell to the disadvantage of the means. In this dark jungle of a world, filled with predators and danger, Annette swings between euphoria and fear. She is completely on her own, subject to the thrill of the unpredictable and the unknown. Paradoxically, this adventurous parallel life consists primarily of waiting and long hours of travel in stuffy, overcrowded trains, of hundreds of kilometers on foot or bicycle, of hunger and boredom and nights spent in empty, unheated rooms. Although a few resistance fighters like to dip into funds sent from London to play the lords and dance on the Volcano, most of the troops make do with the bare minimum, as does Annette, who knows no one and who, no longer sure exactly who she is nobody.
Hello, I'm Sandra Smith, and I'm going to read to you from a translation I did of Irene Nemirovsky's novel Master of Souls. She wrote many, many novels, and this one in particular, written in the 1930s, deals with the problems of immigration, Unfortunately, these themes are very current today. At the very beginning, we meet Dario Asfar, who, even though he's been in France for 10 years and has all of his medical qualifications, is starving, panicking because his wife has just had a baby, and he has no money, and they have no food, and he's trying to borrow some money in order to survive and feed his family. I'm not giving too much away, but I will say that at the very beginning of the novel, you find that the only way he can get some money is to perform an illegal abortion. Another very topical theme. And this is while his wife has just had a baby, so it's a very difficult situation he's in. At this point, he's gone home and lives in a boarding house with other immigrants, other foreigners. And he's daydreaming about what it would be like to be French and not to be so hungry and be able to make a living. Oh, to be named Dr. Leveillante or Massard or Durand. What a dream that would be. But who would trust him, Dario Asfar, with the features and accent of some dirty foreigner? He knew Dr. Leveillante. He was his neighbor. How he envied his gray beard, his tranquil, good-natured manner, his little car, his pretty house. He slowly climbed the staircase that led to his apartment in the boarding house. He started thinking about Clara and his child again, his joy, his only loves. He, Dario, had a son. He searched his heart for some bit of luck, some god to implore. Who would he ask to protect his son? But he didn't feel the natural pride of a father. He was worried, burdened. He continually stroked his face in a gesture that was so familiar to him. He didn't want to pass on his tormented features, his swarthy complexion, or his dark soul to his son. He went inside. He felt uncomfortable. He didn't feel at home in this place. He didn't feel at home anywhere. He turned on the lamp and sat down in a chair. He was hungry. Hungry had been pursuing him since that morning. Far from satisfying his hunger, the little piece of bread he'd eaten had made him even hungrier. He opened the sideboard, the drawers on the table, knowing perfectly well that he would find no meat, no bread, no money. He walked back and forth in front of a little mirror hanging on the wall, and was ashamed of the sideways glances his image reflected back at him. His pallor, the bitter, depressing crease of his lips, his trembling hands. The night was warm and a little stifling. He took off his jacket, pulled off his false collar, and picked up the evening paper, but the letters danced before his eyes. His hunger increased, carving out a path within him, the sort that leads from a man's body to the very heart of his soul, bringing with it a wave of hateful, desperate, vile thoughts. There was a little restaurant across the street. From his window, Dario saw the bright room and a few tables covered in a long white tablecloth. Every now and then, one of the waiters went over to the window and picked up one of the prepared meals that sat in the window to entice the passerby. Golden peaches in a container, a cold, spiky lobster, Italian wine in round bottles inside straw baskets. He stood up and pressed his face against the window, but it formed a barrier between him and the sight of the food. He opened the window, leaned out, tried to breathe in the aromas that must surely be rising up. Wonderful smells, hot soup, expensive butter, vegetables slowly browned and cooked in a stew pot, and meat. But the restaurant was too far away. All he breathed in was the perfume of crushed flowers that rose up and made him feel sick. On a bench below, a man and woman were kissing in the dim light. Hunger mingled in Dario's body with other desires. He coveted meat and wine, bread and a woman, ripe, juicy fruit in their soft bed, bare breasts whose paleness he thought he could make out as they suddenly appeared from the shadows. but the lovers stood up and went away. Dario swore quietly. Why was life so subtle and delicious to other people? For him, life had the taste of raw, coarse food he had to seek out with difficulty, grasp with effort, sometimes even tear at with his teeth. Why? Thank you very much, and thanks to SANT JORDI for organizing such a great festival. Bye.
Hi, my name is Keila Valdelavio. I am a Venezuelan author and translator living in the US, in New York. And I am currently working on the translation of Patrick Rosal's compilation of poems. He's a Filipino author living also in the US, in New Jersey. I met him thanks to Curtis Bauer, who is a poet and translator as well. And it's been wonderful because thanks to this connection, we have been able to see in each other's eyes the experience of an immigrant with a Hispanic heritage in the US. So I'm going to read you a couple of poems, or one poem in English and in Spanish, from this book I'm working on now. The poem is called A Town Called Sadness, Un pueblo llamado Tristeza. On the 5th day of heartbreak, driving 800 miles to the desert, I pulled into sadness. I parked slantways across 2 stalls, lost as ever, and checked the map for something familiar. I'd rolled into the lot of what looked like a hotel, this big blonde brick building, maybe 5 stories tall, every window the same except for one, flung wide open with a man shoved halfway through, wearing a tank top stretched just past his belly button and a good 6-day scruff on his chin. "Get in here, Diane," he barked. "Bring your ass inside." And Diane, she must have been 11 or so, stood in sagging socks, just 2 parking spots down, staring into the blacktop. I think she knew what I knew too. The day sucked. Even the sky looked like second-hand cotton smeared with cheap mascara. But here's the kicker. Diane's right fist was shoved inside the bold, bright bell of a big, shiny French horn. Its tubes and curves wound toward her mouth. She'd figured out how not to let it slip from her hip, and it was gleaming so hard, this bad overcast hanging above us all, cantankerous windbag included, considered some of the day's space to this one hunch-shouldered child, clutching a little dazzling galaxy of voluptuous metal. Some of us are lucky enough to arrive at sadness with our eyes open. Some of us are born there with lungs enough to blow. It's as good at any place to put silver to your lips and kiss the world with a blare, even when the world's got it out for you, even if you're wearing knee socks, tore-up kicks, and an ill-fitting skirt that isn't designed after the sky. In sadness, the sky's the design. You don't even have to pull it over your head. I wasn't supposed to get my heart broke. I wasn't supposed to fuck it up. I wasn't supposed to say goodnight. I don't know why I didn't stay long enough to see if Diane got her ass inside, or if she walked away. I like to think she went on, blasting the most curvaceous brass passage she wanted to practice, all afternoon daring anyone, to come and drag her back. I dropped my car into gear and sped out into the highway. I made it to city limits. I passed the exit for Hope. I made my way to the desert. It was just one day, of course, but it was the day I counted myself smart enough to stop in a town I couldn't find on any map. It was the day I got moving soon enough that there was no end to joy. Un pueblo llamado Tristeza. En el 5º día del despecho, conduciendo 800 millas desierto adentro, me detuve en Tristeza. Estacioné en diagonal, entre 2 puestos, perdido como siempre, y chequeé el mapa, buscando algo familiar. Había entrado al estacionamiento de lo que parecía un hotel, un edificio de ladrillo ocre, quizás 5 pisos de altura, cada ventana idéntica a la siguiente, a excepción de una, abierta de par en par con un hombre, mitad del cuerpo afuera, guardacamisa estirada, apenas hasta el ombligo, y una buena barba de 6 días en el mentón. «Entra ya, Diane», rugió. «Mueve el culo hasta acá». Y Diane tendría unos 11, de pie en calcetines caídos, apenas 2 puestos más allá, miraba fijamente el asfalto. Creo que sabía lo que yo también sabía. Aquel era un día horrible. Hasta el cielo parecía algodón rehusado, embarrado en rímel barato. Pero acá lo fascinante. El puño derecho de Diane estaba hundido en la campana de un enorme corno francés. Los tubos y curvas enrollados hacia su boca. Había descubierto cómo mantenerlo firme en su cadera y relucía tanto que este mal presagio colgando sobre nosotros, fanfarrón, cascarrabias incluido, cedía un minúsculo espacio del día a esta niña encorvada, aferrándose tan pequeña galaxia deslumbrante de voluptuoso metal. Algunos tenemos la suerte de llegar a tristeza con los ojos abiertos. Otros hemos nacido allí, con pulmones suficientes para soplar. Es un lugar tan bueno como cualquiera para llevar plata a tus labios y besar el mundo con un estruendo, aun si el mundo la tiene cogida contigo, aun si llevas las medias a la rodilla, zapatillas rotas y una falda maltrecha, no inspirada en el cielo. En tristeza el cielo es el diseño. No tienes ni siquiera que deslizarlo por tu cabeza. No se suponía que me rompiera el corazón. No se suponía que lo jodiera todo. No se suponía que dijera buenas noches. No sé por qué no me quedé el tiempo suficiente para ver si Diane movió al fin el culo hasta su casa o si se alejó caminando. Me gusta pensar que continuó toda la tarde practicando a todo dar el pasaje para metales más curvilíneo posible, retando a alguien a quien fuera a arrastrarla de vuelta a casa. Puse el auto en marcha y aceleré hasta la autopista. Alcancé los límites de la ciudad. Pasé la salida de Esperanza y me abrí camino hacia el desierto. Fue solo un día de carretera, pero fue el día en que supe lo suficientemente listo para detenerme en un pueblo que no podía encontrar en un mapa. Fue el día en que me puse en marcha tan pronto que la alegría no tuvo límites. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Esperanza Hope Snyder, and welcome to a book launch to celebrate the publication of Delicates by award-winning Cuban writer Wendy Guerra, a collection of steamy and sensual poetry co-translated by me and Nancy Naomi Carlson and published by the wonderful Seagull Books in Calcutta, India. We are deeply grateful to Marianne Newman for including us in this year's SANT JORDI festival, and so glad you, the audience, are here to listen to what we have to say. Well, we're going to start off with intros and then a brief conversation about Delicates and how it came to be that this book got translated. We'll spend the rest of our time together reading from the book, both in Spanish and in English. So let's get started with my introducing Nancy to you, and she'll take it from there. Nancy Naomi Carlson won the 2022 Oxford Weidenfeld Translation Prize for translating Cal Turabuli's Cargo Hold of Stars, Coolitude. Her second poetry collection, An Infusion of Violets, Seagull Books 2019, was named New and Noteworthy by the New York Times. A recipient of 2 translation grants from the NEA and decorated by the French government with the academic palms, Carlson has earned 2 doctoral degrees and is the translations editor for On the Seawall. It's great to be here with you, Nancy.
Oh, thank you, Esperanza, and thank you, Marianne, and the audience as well. And let me introduce to you my co-translator and the one who got us started. This collaboration would never have happened had Esperanza not found this book in Bogota. Esperanza Hope Snyder's poems and translations have appeared in Blackbird, Free State Review, the Gettysburg Review, the Kenyon Review, International Poetry Review, and elsewhere. Assistant Director of Breadloaf in Sicily, and co-coordinator of the Lorca Prize. She's the author of Esperanza and Hope, Sheep Meadow Press, and co-translator with me of Wendy Guerra's Delicates, which was recently recommended by the New York Times Book Review. Wendy Guerra is a critically acclaimed Cuban poet and novelist. Author of 3 collections of poetry, her works have been translated into 13 languages. Todos se van, Everyone's Leaving, a novel, was adapted into a screenplay. Guerra's Ropa Interior was published in Spain, perhaps too controversial for Cuba. Indeed, Guerra, who quotes Anais Nin in an epigraph at the start of this poetry collection and has translated her work, has been described as a sort of descendant of Nin. So, Esperanza, let's talk a little bit about our collaboration. What drew you to Wendy's book, how you found it, why you felt this was something important to bring to an English-speaking audience.
So it's an interesting story, Nancy, because it's been a longer journey than I had anticipated, but it's been a wonderful journey, translation journey. I was in Bogota visiting my brother and went to a bookstore there, always looking for books in Spanish, things that interest me. It could be novels, poetry, and so forth. But I went to the poetry section and found Wendy's book there, Ropa Interior, as you see. And I believe it was 2010. The book came out in 2008, but I believe I found it at maybe 2009. So I picked it up and I started reading it and found it fascinating. And what drew me to the book was the voice. It was the experience of a Cuban artist, a woman, writing while she was living in Cuba at the time. And also the connection that I felt, because she, for instance, she studied film. Gabriel Garcia Marquez was one of her mentors. So there was the Colombian connection. And then for me, just reading the book, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have English readers experience these descriptions and this sensuality and this amazing point of view that's different from the norm. At least for me, it felt that way. And so that's how I discovered the book. And since then, I started working on publishing a few of her poems, and I got in touch with Wendy, and she was thrilled to have her work translated into English, as you know, because I've told you the story, but for our listeners. And so anyway, so then I kept on working on it, and there were moments when I was discouraged because the translations were not necessarily being picked up as quickly by journals and magazines as I was hoping, but I never gave up. So then you came into the picture, and it became possible because since we met, and we have this history that goes back to Gettysburg, to the Gettysburg Review, and to that conference, and we met there, and I was able to become acquainted with your work, and then you came to Shepherdstown, where I live, and I observed you and heard you read and read your translations, and it was intuition. It was divine inspiration that came to me. And so that's when I brought it up to you, as you know.
And I'm so glad that you did, and the connections of things. And at that point, my daughter was teaching at Shepherd University, Shepherd College, I guess it was. And so I would come up to Shepherdstown to see her in her concerts. And so the connections there, because I'd never been to Shepherdstown before that. And I was delighted at the challenge, because typically I translate Francophone poets from Africa and the Caribbean. And I did teach Spanish and French as a career. So I before I became a counselor, so I came to it honestly, but Spanish wasn't something that I was drawn to translate on my own. And so when you suggested, I thought, wow, that would be a great way to get back to Spanish, to work with you. And you're such a marvelous poet. And when you co-translate with someone who's a poet, that makes everything easier because you've got the aesthetics of a poet when you're translating the poetry. So yeah, we started that project, and then since I've been working with Seagull Books, I one late night I sent some of the translations to Naveen and asked if he might be interested in publishing it, and he was just he loved the translations, and he said yes, of course. And so the rest is history. That our book, we don't have the copies in hand. We have a cover. So this is our cover, and the beautiful cover was designed by Shinandini Banerjee, who is the graphic editor, one of the editors. She edits the work, but also does the cover design. And she came up with the cover, which went through, the title went through some iterations where we were trying to figure out, because literally it's underwear. That's what it means. And we thought, well, we'd have a book. I'd be waving it around and it would say underwear. And it just didn't seem to get to that sensuality that Wendy's poems exude. And somehow we got to closer with dainties, I think. And then we ended up with delicates. And we ended up with this cover. And yeah, we're excited that it will be in print and we're going to be able to hold our copies there. Before we start reading, one other quick question about some of the difficulties and the challenges for you as a native Spanish speaker in translating this book.
Well, I think, and you and I, first of all, I have to say that it's been a fascinating journey with you. And I've really enjoyed working with you, and I've learned a great deal from you. It's been I had never co-translated before, and I think it's a very unique experience, and I certainly recommend it to other translators. Where I learned your point of view, your outlook, your philosophy, your so many talents that you have that you shared with me, and I hope I brought other things as well as we have discussed. But for me, the challenges were how to maintain the essence of the poem, but at the same time be able to communicate it to English readers in a way that made sense. I mean, and I think that's a problem that we have as translators in general, right? How to communicate the heart of the poem while remaining faithful to the diction. So that was one part. The other one was the Cuban culture and the historic period during which Wendy writes, because it's very unique. You know, she grew up in Cuba. So she was there when she experienced all these situations that occurred, as we know also from her novel, Todos se van. So here's a person who is not an expat writing about Cuba, living somewhere else. Now, since then, she's moved, as we know, she's moved to Miami, but it's very recent. It's been since the pandemic. Until then, she was living in Cuba most of the time. And so for instance, I remember you and I were talking about that poem about On Your Knees, Santeria, how to communicate all these images, but at the same time, not have it be something that is some sort of puzzle that is difficult to understand or interpret. So for me, the diction was a challenge, but it was, I always had my moments with you when we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and then this word made sense. So I loved it. I loved that challenge because I also loved running, you know, I did initially, as you know, I started with very literal translations. And then from there, we went on to the next level and the next level. And I think that was for me, being able to capture what it is to be a woman, an artist living in Cuba at a certain period, during a certain period of time, and expressing this, as we know, sensuality at the same time, this incredible creativity, this desire for change and travel, you know, this love of the island. So to me, that was the challenge. Yeah.
And so I think you survived co-translating with me. It's not an easy feat.
Yes.
I describe it as like fighting with my co-translator, you know, and for me, I love that she has music infused into her poems, and that's my thing with the sound mapping and bringing out the assonances and alliterations. And so I'm hard as a co-translator because and then once we think we have it, okay, and I'm sure you're going, okay, we're now on to the next, and I'm like, you know, I'm thinking about this word in this line, and you're thinking, oh no, what's she doing here? But I think Mary Jo Bang talks about translation as interrogating each word. And I think that is what I do, and along with a co-translator. And because you're the expert in the language and you're the native speaker, but then it becomes an issue of, well, maybe you say that in Colombia this way, but maybe they don't say it that way in Madrid. And so then I think we looked up underwear to see all the different ways. And it's a fascinating process. And I look back and think, you know, all those hours that we spent, and really it took us time, but at least we got the book done, and it's in a good home. And so I think it's time to hear some of the poems.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
So
I'm going to
I think we're going to do. Oh, sorry. I think you're going to do the Peninsular Psalm, and you're going to read that in English because I think your voice is closer to Wendy's than mine. And then I'll read some English, and we'll do Spanish too, if that's okay.
That sounds great. That sounds great. Okay, so Peninsular Psalm. Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum, you who stretch to where the limit cannot kiss, who make of fish the purest food for humankind. You who sustain ships and worlds, who make an offering of saints to the wind's violent tenderness like miracles of faith. You who divide and distance, isolate and drive away, postpone and flee. O Mare Nostrum, just as you have that strength in my past, shatter the crystalline water and cause it to burst forth to heal my tormented present without fearing the broken waves. Mare Nostrum, and with the conviction of the Messiah on the water, approach me. Protect his mysterious entry into my pocket bay as the river enters its children's eyes. As its mouth enters my small mouth of salt and sand sifted by pain, Mare Nostrum, insular platform, make him take the route of good, blue blood passage through my scattered country, my wounded paradise, my etching. Make of my body a glass bridge that I may bring home dissipated creatures, illuminate their feet, their course, their footsteps. If they were once my friends, never convert them into my enemies. Let them come, navigate my sea without judging the communion of our distant bodies. May their legs' destiny and their eyes' pleasure over the valley be blessed by your blue, Mare Nostrum. Make them return and do not close the common door which these days remains sealed, so the pleasure of what is not only ours may finally be divine, so you may be sea, man, and woman in the precise humidity of our bodies, so the beach and its surroundings may be yours, so the route fish take through their usurped territory makes sense once more, so we may be together as always and forevermore. Amen.
So now we're going to read a few poems about Cuba. And as you know, Cuba was occupied by the Russians. And so there was that Russian influence and still has that influence there. But Wendy has written about that. And we've got 2 poems about that. So Esperanza, maybe you'll read the Spanish first.
Yes, the Spanish. So on how the Cubans started saying goodbye. De cómo los rusos se fueron despidiendo. Ellos nunca se integraron. Nos hablaban y nosotros contestábamos bailando. Ellos nunca fueron parte. Andaban visibles como su olor, ocultos como sus submarinos. No sé a dónde puedo dirigirles esta carta. Recuerdo que enseñé a mis amigos de Moscú a fajarse sin llorar. Pero ellos nunca se integraron. Quizás fuera el calor o las películas. Poco a poco se fueron despidiendo. Y koniec, fin en ruso.
And that poem ends with that Russian word that I may mispronounce, and there's been a little controversy about what the Russian word is, so I respect that. Wendy has used this word, so we went with that. On how the Russians started saying goodbye. They never fit in. When they spoke to us, we answered dancing. They never belonged. They walked around conspicuous as their smell, mysterious as their submarines. I don't know where I can send them this letter. I remember teaching my friends from Moscow how to beat each other up without crying, but they never fit in. Perhaps it was the heat or the movies. Little by little, they started saying goodbye and cognac. Another one about Cuba and Russia is going to be a face in the crowd, graffiti, and Esperanza will read in Spanish first.
Correcto. Un rostro en la muchedumbre, grafitis. Mis padres una vez tuvieron la razón. Se conocieron en una plaza abarrotada cantando a coro. Se amaron en un mar de 10 literas acalladas por la voz de silencio. Me trajeron al mundo en un salón de camas ordenadas en emociones compartidas. Nadamos en playas atestadas de bañistas confundidos por trajes idénticos y camiones colectivos. Los sábados en la noche vimos las mismas películas, llorando a la par de un país subtitulado en blanco y negro. Los domingos nos dijimos adiós, confusos en el azul uniformado que nos separó. Mis padres, cuando por fin se quedaron solos, perdieron la razón.
A face in the crowd, graffiti. My parents were once of sound mind, singing in chorus. They met in a crowded plaza and loved each other in a sea of 10 bunk beds hushed into silence by a voice. They brought me into the world in a room filled with cots, ordered in shared emotions. We swam at beaches packed with bathers blending together in identical swimsuits and collective trucks. Saturday nights, we watched the same movies, weeping along with a country subtitled in black and white. Sundays, we said our goodbyes, indistinct in the uniform blue that split us apart. My parents, when finally left to themselves, lost their minds. Next up, we're going to have Esperanza read the title poem of the book, Delegates, which, hold on to your seat, it's pretty steamy.
Okay, here we go. Delegates. In the showers of men, we leave our bodies tied well to the solar pipes. We mark our territory like animals in heat, our panties saturated with sand and a sidereal isolating odor. Remains of the sex we had yesterday left behind in bathrooms. Rose water and wax drippings from vanilla-scented candles. Broken tears in the profane lace of dawn. My earrings have disappeared, lost in the soap of a brief lust. And sir, the creams anoint your sheets like venom from silvered goddesses. Look how we snatched freedom from their minds. We open blame under the expanded umbrella of the afternoon. We return with their children, withholding the real names of their genes. In delicates, we read our pages, pursuing only their desire. Each line of rice is a moan. Can I hide under my hats without being found? Can they guess? A tunic and a shield that would dodge love's blows. There is more under the hat, I swear. On the bed, I assembled the puzzle of words, a white planar surface for skating in the nude, black delicates without pain. And even if I say it all, it would not reach your senses intact. You don't understand. You would have to learn to undress me. We live the anthropology of a grievous colonization, a colonization close to this weak culture, strong, insecure, exiled sex. I read the lines the editor underscores but don't smoke. I can't allay my anxiety and can no longer forget what I have lived. In your bathroom still linger my potions, my essences, my slipstream, my stampede. I keep a train, a calla lily, a dragonfly, and the picture of my back taken while I slept. I'm not lace, nor seashell, nor evil. It's not only what you see, because I've left. My ideas are more profound than the bags you see in museums. I am writing on what I try to hide that might not survive. Delicates in another bathroom's bottle, another humidity, so much cold. Codes don't exist. They are given away to the other woman I was in an unconnected ritual. There's no snow in this country, and even if I were to break down and eternally weep, only in delicates do I manage to save myself. I leave my writings in your house, but there's more frivolous and profound, more pagan. I write on mirrors, and you find yourself swimming in this false oblivion. You snooping inside my handbag, diving into the past like a boy. You only see childhood photos with my mother.
Yeah. We're going to finish up with hopefully a trio of jazz pieces. There's one for trumpet, one for bass, and one for piano, and I'm keeping an eye on our clock and see if we can get through all three in our last 5 minutes. So we're going to start with trumpet and maybe the Spanish.
Trompeta. La sordina amaina, calmando esta neurosis poco a poco. Sus labios son higos que estrujan la boquilla, mientras la ciudad es un diamante ahogado en vino tinto. La trompeta padece lo que mi cuerpo siente. Es muy tarde ya y se queja de todos los que duermen. Están a salvo del dolor agudo. No puedo sostenerme sobre la noche sin llorar. La trompeta suena a lo perdido. Eso que antes no sabías, aún estabas esperando.
Trumpet, the mute quiets, calming this neuroses little by little. Lips are figs squeezing the mouthpiece, while the city is a diamond drowned in red wine. The trumpet suffers from what my body feels. It's already very late, and the trumpet complains about all who sleep safe from acute pain. I can't lean on the night without weeping. The trumpet sounds like something lost, that thing you didn't know you were still waiting for. And I think, in the interest of time, I'll read the other two in English. Bass. I step on the club's carpets, which tamp down that intense sound. Low, low, low. My clothes plucked in pizzicato get ruined, go slack at the end of the day. Like taut garters, they easily pop, defeated. I break free of everything, even when the rhythm of this hour sets the beat. You solemnly play the fibers of my stomach. Now I must surrender to the depth of the sounds. A silvered, moody, and humid hour is what remains. Where one plays in a well-tempered key, the most serious thing is said. Underground, irascible, and cunning, that instrument plays dirty with me. It touches what's musty in me, and the wooden sound drives me mad. Piano. From Russia, from Vienna, from the Carpathian Mountains. From what faraway place does Georges Sand come fleeing on her horse? pursued by two insane pianists, unraveled in her books, unleashed. She escapes, but the sound hovers, harasses her in her obsession. An elephant was slaughtered for the sake of the ivory, the finger strokes, an arrangement of white your hand suggests, as opposed to ebony. From where does the sound come in crowded rooms? Who renounced their velvet shawl, red from sorrow, abandoning this ancestral desolation, breaking through in a fugue? The moment the piano tightens its strings, moans, I surrender. What can I do to console it? Nothing. Huge antediluvian, immovable, inspired, and beautiful, from Nigeria, from Abyssinia, from Senegal. From where does this terrifying echo come? So strange. So I thank you all for being so attentive and listening to us. And glad you've joined us. Esperanza, do you want to say a final word?
I'm delighted to be here. I'm glad that we were able to share our translation today. And thank you. Thank you to all those who have joined us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of SANT JORDI. Outside of Barcelona, Catalonia, we're celebrating literature in translation. SANT JORDI, New York, USA, organized by Marianne Newman and the Farragut Foundation. We are happy to participate again this year with a segment of the Mediterranean diet. My name is Rosie Song. I'm a professor of Iberian Studies at Durham University, where I research and teach on Spanish culture and literature. Lately, I focus my research on food studies and the history of eating, cooking, and everything food related in the context of the Iberian Peninsula. Today, my guests are Francesc Soler Parellada, Paco for friends. He is Professor Emeritus from the Polytechnical University of Catalonia. His areas of expertise and research are innovation and regional economic development, focused on economics of technological change, educational systems, and entrepreneurship. He is the owner of the famed restaurant Set Portas, a reference restaurant in the city of Barcelona, which offers an extensive tour of traditional Catalan and Mediterranean cuisine. 186 years this restaurant has been in the city and based its products on local products without giving up the contributions of international cuisine. Paco is a creator of the series that bring us together today, the historic recipe books of Catalonia, about which we will have a conversation today. Robert Davison, Bob, is, for friends and colleagues, is professor of Spanish and Catalan studies at the University of Toronto. He's the author of Jazz Age Barcelona, published by University of Toronto Press in 2009, shortlisted for the Canada Prize in the Humanities, and The Hotel, Occupied Space, also published by University of Toronto Press in 2018. His current work includes a study of material culture and early 20th century Spanish and Catalan narrative, and a new research project entitled The Scent of Spain, Fragrance, Odor, and Culture, that considers key fragrances as scents that contributed to the Spanish olfactory environment from the beginning of the modern fragrance industry in the country to the early 2000s. He is the founder and co-editor of University of Toronto Iberic Book Series and has published work on different aspects of the Castilian and Catalan avant-gardes, cultural theory, and film. More importantly, he's been working on cava and terroir and Catalan food. So I think that he is the perfect guest to talk about the Reset Buddies.
Hi, Rosie. Hi, Paco.
Hello. So let me share a little bit about the topic of our conversation. I'm going to share the screen and show you the beginning of the screen is actually an image of the restaurant that I just mentioned in the introduction, the restaurant at Portas, which indeed is an emblematic and iconic restaurant in the city of Barcelona. And during the past years, Paco has been working on this project on the, let me see if I can do this. For some reason, I am having I'm having a technical problem here. Hold on a sec. Hold on a sec. Let me do this and just do my screen. Sorry. Can you see that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. For some reason, this is not. Okay, there we go. Let me just do this again one more time. Sorry about that. Okay. Do you see the collection now?
Yes.
Okay. So as I was saying, Paco has been working on this collection of Catalan historical recipes. He has been thinking about the history of the cookbooks in the history of Catalan cuisine, and has been publishing these books. And so far, about 7 or 8 books have been published. And we wanted to ask Paco actually what inspired this idea. I've taken some text from the website of the restaurant that introduces this series, which is published in collaboration with the publisher Barcino. But we wanted to hear a little bit more about how this idea started. What's the interest? What's the purpose of this project? Because it's a very long and ongoing and expensive project.
Yes, is the success of the amateur. Amateur is someone that make questions, very tough questions, like the children. The children of father, that why the people die? No, everybody. It's a very difficult question. I asked myself how to understand the development of the Catalan cuisine from the beginning, and where to find the literature, the books, etc., that can help me to understand why the one century to another, how the kitchen jump from the one to the other. And nobody, the people said, doesn't exist an answer to your questions. There are translation, there are books that had been produced, and then, but there is no a real. I don't know how to say, a real camino, his trek, to do,
Yeah.
yes, to follow. And then I began to understand that really the Catalan cuisine began in the 14th century with a very well-known book, Sant Jourdi. But after Sant Jourdi, there is another book in at the end of the 15th, beginning the 16th, century, and this is el llibre de Koch, no? 1520 to the first published in imprenta. I don't know how to say in English.
In press.
Press, no?
Yeah, or it has been printed.
It has been printed, exactly. And between these two books, a void. And I asked several professors and researchers which is the connection between Sant Jourdi, the first one, 14th century, and the second one, 16th century, which is the link between one and another. The people said, oh, there is a very important link, but we don't know exactly which one, etc. And then I discovered that from the beginning of the 14th century till the 19th century, there was really a lack of information, and was very difficult to speak about something that is not easy to find. And for the normal people, the people who goes to the library or who goes to a bookshop, said, I want to have the books in Catalan of our recipes and our cooking history. And the owner of the bookshop said, I don't know. There are several books, but there is no a collection of books. And then we decided to publish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the books that were known, with the idea that when the people discover there are a research group, a very rigor books, and the books they print these books and translate and study, and there is the research showed in these books. The people begin to think maybe there are another one. Maybe there are books that is not easy to find. Maybe we can discover books. This happens. See, this happens. Someone said, but you forget this book. This is in this library, etc. And now we have 15 books from the 14th century to the 19th century that exist, we know, and we published. We have published till the number 7, and now we are preparing the 8, 9, etc. But I am not. I am a researcher. But I am not. I didn't practice in the historic. I am not historian. No, the word is historian or historicist or.
It's a historian, yes. Sorry. And actually, I was actually showing that I think that is quite amazing that pursuing these questions that you were saying about what happened from Sant Jourdi on when there was this lag, and you went on to ask these questions, and clearly you became so serious about this quest that you came up with a scientific committee. I'm showing here in the slide. You do have a advisory committee that is helping you put this project together. And as I showed in the other slide, these are some of the titles that have come out. And as you said, you've already identified some of the existence of these manuscripts that I think is really interesting that you say that once you started working on this project, somebody would say, oh, and you forgot about this other manuscript, and you right now have identified a body that will be published. I think that the publication actually changes a little bit depending on what your specialists are working on, but you do have sort of a long process ahead of you to actually complete a very extensive and exhaustive corpus of Catalan historical recipes, which I think is quite amazing.
Yes. Yes,
What is the next one that are you most excited about?
One of the most exciting is a book written in Menorca. We don't know the name of the author of the book. We don't know. There is a very, very few information about this book, but it's very, very interesting because there are recipes very famous, and one of them was the mayonnaise sauce we find there before the Cardinal Richelieu, no, Admiral Richelieu presented in France, naming the salsa Mahonnaise, salsa from Mahon. Mahon is in Menorca. We discovered these recipes 10 or 20 years before the Admiral Richelieu. Well, this is anecdotic, but there are several and very interesting things in this period between the medieval books and the modern age, because there is the fruits and ingredients coming from America and coming from Asia too. And it's very, very interesting because at the beginning, in this period, we have just books coming from the priests. And this is very interesting because they are very well connected all over the world, and they had influences also all over the world. It's interesting, very interesting. And you have the first one, the medieval ones, and now in the modern age, we have all these books with this influence of other ingredients, and you can make a traceabilities and the change of the recipes, etc.
We were thinking about that, the traceability, and as you say, sort of the references of how these books that came from the priest suddenly are receiving other books. And Bob, you and I have talked about how interesting this material is, and in terms of perhaps they also deserve to be known just outside of Catalonia.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when we think about, sort of book culture, print culture, and how print culture has that ability to not only, like you say, bridge geographical gaps, but also temporal gaps and generational gaps within families, within cultures. And so this is one of the great things I see, and that Paco and his team are doing with this collection. It's really fantastic work that we have a series here that is closing the loops. Then also, I think, working as a fantastic example for future scholars, right? Because one of the things, and Rosie, you and I have talked about this, that really makes this, project, it's not just, finding, of course, that's amazing, right? To find these works that have, been lost or lost to us anyway, but the scholarly and historical apparatus that, goes into these packages is that, for researchers like us, and, we know the type of people who are going to be using these books, to have access to that information by experts of the moment, right, is invaluable. And so, at University of Toronto Press, where we've started, people know that we already have the Toronto Iberic series, but we've also recently started, with Rosie and Joe Sharma, the Culinaria series. We've got a couple books up already in that series, but we're very interested in the possibility of translating these works. Not only, a couple of them have, there are English translations that exist, but to bring it together as a series, right? And as a comprehensive unit, right, of Catalan cookery, knowing what we know, and for us in the English speaking world, Coleman Andrews, right, has this sort of, exalted place because of his book. I forget when the first edition came out, but I think now people are ready to sort of advance because we have seen, and, Rosie, in your book, you also pointed this out, how Catalonia works as that hinge between sort of French, European, and, Arabic and Iberian cooking, any culture that can mix oil and butter, right? There you go. So I think that for us to have this, and if we can make it happen and get these translations into English to allow these works to get a larger public and audience, and we're very lucky to have had someone like Paco and his team sort of clear the path for us. And I think people who are interested in food, people who are interested in literature and print culture, there's also that element of the sort of the thrill of the culinary find, right? And every once in a while we see how different cultures sort of come up, in North American bookstores and things. But I think when we show them, sort of the depth and the importance of Catalan cookery over such an important time frame, I think it's going to impress a lot of people.
Is this?
There you go. So we already have the material. We just need this
Exactly.
next step. And I think that for some of the viewers that have been following the Sant Jordi USA, actually, from the beginning of the pandemic, when this used to be an event organized in small library bookstores in New York. And then with the pandemic, it became a virtual event that had more viewers, audiences, and so on, and becoming more international. In one of the earlier conversations, actually, we did talk about this series with Paco and actually Paul Friedman from Yale University, who is part of the scientific committee. So I feel that this conversation is sort of a follow-up from that first introduction to this series. And I think that it is a follow-up because we are working on a project to translate these books. And hopefully La Caixa is still interested in supporting this project. As we said, we had these conversations in the past, yes, fingers crossed, that such a project was very important for Catalan cuisine and Catalan gastronomy and Catalan culture to be written in Catalan for the people living in Catalonia. Yet thinking about the prestige and the culinary reference that Catalonia has become over the past few decades, we think that it's important that such project that has so much knowledge to be shared and to be used with an wider audience is actually ready to be translated. And given sort of that global exposure that Catalan cuisine is having, we think that English actually should be the lingua franca for this material. So we're very excited to be working in that sort of mediation, translation, but also linking those culinary traditions and cultures. Bob, you were saying something about how we locate these traditions as well.
Mm-hmm. No, and I just wanted to put a plug in too, because this is something that we also have a history of at UTP with, Artusi's famous book, which luckily for us, Stanley Tucci mentioned on his show, which caused this, it's always been a bestseller, but it's even, gone higher. But that idea that we do, and I think this goes into sort of the push towards sensory experience, right? And that through cooking, not only reading and looking at the beautiful images and everything, but then by trying some things out, maybe learning to play with different and new techniques, right? Different ingredients, adapting things. And this is where you get into the culinary community. So how do I cook with this? How do I try that? Right. And that idea that you can taste the culture, right? And you can smell the culture and you can feel the culture. And this is, I think, part of, sometimes we don't think about this as much, but the community that's created when we cook together and when we say, introduce ourselves or get introduced to a new culture through the kitchen, right? Through the plate, on the plate. And not just by visiting a fantastic restaurant like Paco's restaurant, but also doing it ourselves, perhaps, which is, I think, part of the charm, right? Of buying, recipe books, right?
Yes, and I wanted to just plug in one of the visualizations of one of the receptaries that Paco's project published, which is actually the SANT JORDI, but it visualized one of the recipes, which is the sauce for a peacock. So when I saw this visualization, I thought I must have this image for our book. Oh, there you go, Paco. For our book, A Taste of Barcelona. And actually, the publishers were kind enough to allow us to print, to actually think about these older recipes. These are from the Middle Ages, and to think about, oh, this is how they actually prepare or thought about, cooking these animals. So I don't know, I haven't done it yet, but certainly when I taught this this book to my students, they were very excited to try it on. So for Paco, have you tried it?
Yes, we tried.
Oh, you did?
A little bit catastrophic, but
why catastrophic?
Well, because it's supposed that if you cook the turkey, you have to protect the las plumas on
the feathers.
The feathers,
yeah.
And it's very complicated.
And burned feathers does not add to the experience. No.
We reached to cook the turkey, but we cooked the feathers too.
Oh no.
So visualizing was one thing, but actually practice was another. There could be an issue of translation as well. So Paco, thinking about this work being translated, what are some of your desires, or what are some of your some of your goals or objectives for having this work translated for a wider audience as well?
I don't understand.
So if these books get published in English,
yes,
what do you want them to accomplish, to achieve?
Well, the first one is to put Catalonian kitchen on the map, no? Because if you cannot read in English, there is a problem, and you don't exist. And I was yesterday seeing in TV a program of Jimmy Oliver, English cook, and he was in Sicily, and he was preparing something that you can find here, no? Yes, and I think it's a good idea to facilitate the comprehension, the understanding of the kitchen in the cooking in the Mediterranean Sea. This is the first, and the second, I don't know if we say that there is no such a thing in France or in Italy. I don't know. I think it's the first time that in a country you publish all the books with the same methodology, with a very powerful research group, the people from the United States, from Spain, etc., and in a very rigorous spirit, no? And I think that would be a very good idea. We thought that maybe the European Commission were interested also in financing this kind of projects in other countries in Europe. And if this was possible, we could online or whatever have all the book, the recipes book in the European area and in the world area, if it's possible. This is our goal.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I think it's really important that, you know, the respect be there, right? For the fact that, you know, we see all these other sort of scientific and humanities projects that get a lot of respect. We have this thing. And, you know, it's only now finally that gastronomy and food studies is starting to really sort of assert itself as a field that deserves, obviously, to be taken seriously. And when we're able to point to projects like yours, it makes our job easier as scholars too, right? To say, look, this is a group that's taking their culinary history very, very seriously. Look at this product. And like you said, it's the methodology that extends throughout the project, right? So there's a definite arc there that with, you know, and you've got 15, I think you said, you know, to create this whole, which itself will stand as a wonderful, you know, sort of philological and culinary achievement.
Yeah, and definitely serve as a model. I think that a lot of these conversations about food and history and recipe collections have somehow been very popular and people been working, but in a more sort of not quite a mature-ish way, but a little bit more sporadic and depending on trends and moments and individuals. But to think about a project with this kind of arc that you mentioned, Bob, I think is really important. And certainly this could serve as a model for a lot of nations or a lot of cultures that really do want to trace their own evolution, culinary evolution, and sort of understand their own culture as well. So definitely, I think that even not only as a project that allows knowledge about Catalan cooking traditions for readers beyond the Catalan language, but also as a model for future work for other contexts was really, really helpful. I'm going to just very quickly plug in the book that you mentioned, Bob, before I do that, there is a newsletter on this website that you can sign up to hear about the latest publications of this series if you want to sign up and receive their newsletter. And also this is the translation that the Culinaria series is publishing, The Art of Cooking, Pie Making, Pastry Making, and Preserving. So a lot of these books, in a way, are helping us put together the history of places. Is not only about food, but it's about people, it's about culture, it's about shared culture, it's about shared identity. So I think that these are very important work that we're very thankful that the Sant Jordi celebration always makes space for books, but also for food. Thank you so much, Paco and Bob, to be here again with me, and hope our next share meal is very soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Gracias.
you. See you next year. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Now.
Hello, I'm Sandra Smith, and I have translated about 14 works by Irene Nemirovsky. And the reading I'm going to do for you today is from her very first work, written when she was only about 20 years old, but it foreshadows the great author that she was to become. It's called The Prodigal Child, and it's a combination of fiction, fable, parable, biblical story, all rolled into one. It's extremely interesting. The main character, whose name is Ishmael Baruch, is a young boy brought up in an Orthodox family in a very, very poor ghetto. And he has a gift, and his gift is the gift of being able to imagine and sing songs that are absolutely beautiful and come from inspiration within. So I'm going to read you a bit of when he first discovers this gift, and one of the men from the port in the inn asks him to sing a song because he's so sad because the woman he loves has died. Ishmael closed his eyes and started to sing, or rather chant, in a slow, pure voice that echoed in the silence of the night. She died, and I dragged myself through the pointless day, like a fisherman drags his empty nets behind him, far away. Yes, yes, that's it, Izidora sobbed. Keep singing, little one. They were both swaying over the parapet, heads thrown back toward the immense sky, where the stars shimmered so brightly that they seemed to be sending a kind of sweet, endless echo to the entire firmament. And Ishmael kept singing, intoxicated by the words he was inventing. He strove to chant the words using the phrasing of popular songs, and now and again calling out a sonorous, guttural alas that Izidora would repeat in his powerful voice. A few men came out of the inn. They surrounded Ishmael in silence. The music worked like wine on all those coarse, dazed men. They listened, astonished by the new song. Ishmael continued singing, and his heart grew lighter, lighter within his chest, like a bird about to take flight. And a strange clarity filled his mind, the kind of clarity that exhilaration or delirium sometimes brings. All night long they had him sing. They joined in to sing the refrains that Ishmael discovered in his soul, like treasures placed there by God for all eternity. When he stopped, exhausted, they poured him a drink. He finally fell silent, rolled off the parapet onto the sand, and fell asleep there. The next night at the inn, they hoisted him up onto the table and had him sing again. Never did the boy think about the words in advance. They came to life in him like mysterious birds to whom he only needed give a little nudge, and the music that accompanied those words came just as naturally. The fights, the shouting, the wild laughter of the drunken women did not bother him, for he continually invented drinking songs, and all the noise and clamor were indispensable to them. Sometimes he would tilt his head and begin slow, plaintive chants that these Slavs had never before heard, and that was simply an unconscious echo of the sad Jewish songs that arose from the depths of time like an immense sob, growing stronger and stronger through the ages until they reached the child's soul. Then everyone would fall silent, form a circle around him, huddling together to better hear him, enchanted, their bright eyes wistful in their brutish faces. They made him sing the same thing 20 times. He indulged them willingly, proud of his superiority over these men, who could have easily destroyed him with a single blow. Prouder than Orpheus must have been as a child when he played to the wild beasts. His fame resounded throughout the area. It's a very, very interesting book, and I hope that I've given you a little taste of it so that you'd like to read it. Thanks very much, and thanks to Sant Jordi for organizing this wonderful festival. Bye.